Chapter 1206. After the two children left the room, they turned to the door of Lin Xiao's bedroom. Wu Yueling pulled down the doorknob and slowly pushed the door open, then both of them poked their heads in to take a look. They saw that the two adults were lying well, but there was an energy flowing in their bodies. Although they couldn't see it, both of them could feel it. Wu Yueling had awakened her special ability, so she could more or less sense it. Little Tingting's physique was special. Even if he hadn't awakened it, he could still sense a lot of things. For example, the premonition and the energy that he could sense now. Dad. Wu Yueling looked at the two adults on the bed with their eyes closed, then looked at little Tingting. She wanted to get close to wake them up, but she felt that the energy field on their bodies was unusual. She was a little scared, so she could only call softly at the door. Little Tingting said, "Okay, stop calling, they definitely won't wake up. Let's go a little closer and I'll see how they are." Even he couldn't feel the telepathic connection between his mom and him, so they definitely couldn't hear his and Wu Yueling's voices now. Why? Wu Yueling looked at him blankly and asked as she slowly walked to Lin Xiao's bed. Because they can't hear. Little Tingting hugged Wu Yueling's neck to prevent himself from falling. He turned his head and looked at Lin Xiao and little Tingting while answering Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling glanced at little Tingting with a half-understanding expression, then walked closer and closer to the bed. After she stood still, little Tingting stared at the two on the bed for a long time before he breathed a sigh of relief. He said aloud, "But they are fine now. It will probably take another 2 days for them to recover. Okay, let's go." As he said, he pointed outside the door. Wu Yueling hesitantly looked at the two adults on the bed, then walked out with little Tingting in her arms. "But no one boiled water for us to wash our faces," little Tingting said carelessly. "What are you afraid of? Auntie Duan and Uncle Xiao will be here soon. It's the same to ask them to help. Let's sit on the sofa and wait for them." So the two of them didn't wash their faces or brush their teeth. They just hugged the blankets and curled up on the sofa, waiting for the two people to report. In the end, they waited for 2 hours. Because they got up too early. Before he reached the door, little Tingting had already sensed him. He immediately pushed Wu Yueling. "Quick, go, open the door. They're here." Wu Yueling climbed off the sofa and put on her shoes. Then, she turned around and wrapped the blanket around Tingting. Then he jogged towards the door, tiptoed to unlock the door, pulled down the handle and opened the door. She hung her hand on the door and poked her head out to look. She saw two people walking over from the corridor near the stairs. After opening the door, she ran back to the sofa and hugged Tingting for warmth. Duan Wan and Xiao Liqing met on the stairs. Duan Wan lived in this building, and Xiao Liqing happened to be walking up. When he arrived at Lin Xiao's house, he found that the door was already open. Looking inside, she saw two children huddled together on the sofa, looking at the door with 2 pairs of bright eyes. "Lingling, did you guys wake up late today?" Xiao Liqing asked in surprise as he put down the briefcase in his hand after he saw the two children's messy appearance. Then, as if he suddenly sensed something, he looked towards Lin Xiao's bedroom in confusion. "Something seems to be going on in Chief's room," Duan Wan said with a serious expression before she put down the things in her hands. Xiao Liqing nodded. He felt it too. The two of them walked to Lin Xiao's bedroom at the same time. After knocking on the door, they opened it and looked inside. However, they saw the two of them lying quietly on the bed without any reaction. Duan Wan and Xiao Liqing looked at each other and walked towards the bed. "Uncle." At this moment, Wu Yueling stood at the door and leaned against the door frame to come in. She looked at the two of them and called out. Xiao Liqing suddenly turned around and looked at Wu Yueling in surprise. "Lingling, did you call me just now?" Wu Yueling nodded slightly. Xiao Liqing immediately walked towards her happily and bent down to pick her up. "That's great. Call me again?" This child actually spoke? When did it start? Why didn't he know? "Oh, we haven't brushed our teeth and washed our faces," Wu Yueling said seriously as she let him carry her. "Did you two get up by yourselves? Have they been like this all morning?" Duan Wan walked a few steps towards Xiao Liqing and asked Wu Yueling softly. Wu Yueling nodded again. Xiao Liqing was very happy to see that this child could speak again. He immediately put aside the matter of the two people on the bed. After all, This child did not dare to speak after old Wu scared her last time. It had been so long, even Xiao Liqing himself thought that Lingling would not be able to recover so quickly. It's okay. Uncle will boil water for you later and make breakfast for you. Wait here for a while. He did not plan to ask the two children what was going on with the two people on the bed. After all, the children might not know. And although the two people on the bed were a little strange, no matter how he looked at it, they were absorbing energy. Moreover, they were doing it together. Since it was not a big deal, it was more important to take care of the two children first. How long do you think they'll last like this? They have level 8 energy beast cores in their hands, and from the looks of the remaining energy, they did not absorb much last night. Can't they stop on their own? Duan looked back at the two people on the bed in confusion and said, that was because her leader already had a long list of things to do today, so she definitely wouldn't be absorbing energy at this time. She had not woken up yet, which meant that something unexpected had happened. She would not be able to wake up on her own. Old Wu was probably the same. Xiao Liqing had already walked out of the bedroom. He heard her words but did not take it to heart. He said, they will probably only wake up when the energy in the beast core is completely absorbed. Lingling, you two sit on the sofa and don't move. I will go boil water for you. Duan put the bag in her hand on the counter by the wall of the living room. Lin Xiao and Wu Qinyue's bags and a pile of documents were still there. After putting down the things, she began to look for a comb to comb Wu Yueling's hair. At this time, Teng Teng sat up from the blanket and said, don't worry, they will be fine in 2 days. So just pile up the things that they have to do in these 2 days. Duan found a comb and came out. She heard Teng Teng's words and smiled. She sat next to Wu Yueling and said, what else can we do? This is the only way. Then, as she combed Wu Yueling's hair, she asked her, is your Uncle Zhao's cooking delicious? Wu Yueling was silent for a few seconds and turned to look in the direction of the kitchen. With a hesitant expression, she whispered to Duan, it's not as delicious as Dad's. It meant that it was edible but not that good. Chapter 1207. At this moment, in a certain research office in the Universal Base, Lung Xiantong stared at the documents in his hands and said gloomily, a nest of gorillas isn't enough, and now there are so many of them. Where did these things come from? Could it be that there's a world that leads to a second-dimensional space underground? It attracted all the creatures from that world? Although he was just making an analogy, these things did seem like creatures that didn't belong to this world. But it was impossible to say that it led to a second-dimensional space, but it was hard to say whether there was a world that hadn't been discovered by science underground. Lin Hao, who was sitting on his left, leaned against the back of the chair and sighed with a frown. He couldn't help but complain, I thought zombies were the scariest, but in the end, I realized that the scarcity of food was scarier than zombies. Plants mutated, animals mutated, the whole world is mutating, even humans are changing. In the end, there's a second apocalypse. Forget about the second apocalypse, now there's a bunch of strange but powerful creatures. It's fine if they come out, but why do they like to eat humans? Can't they be vegetarians? Can't they eat something else? Lung Xiantong glanced at him and said, otherwise, why would it be called the apocalypse? It's like we've returned to primitive times. Lin Hao glanced at him and adjusted his expression, then said to him, all right, let's stop complaining here. How's your research over there? Isn't that root plant something that the gorillas are afraid of? Will it have an effect on the others? Lung Xiantong shook his head, no, it's only affecting those gorillas. On the way back, Lin Xiao brought back 3 types of creatures that came out from the underground for them to experiment on. 2 of them were alive, and 1 was dead. Because the dead ones would continuously emit a poisonous gas when they were alive, it had a huge impact on the surroundings. So, to facilitate the dissection and research, Lin Xiao brought back a few corpses. So, after Lin Xiao came back, Lung Xuantong's research lab went into a busy state. Lin Hao turned his head in disappointment and looked at Yan Huiguang, who was sitting a little further away from them and had been silent. He asked, Mr. Yan didn't make any progress either? Ever since this big boss came back with his sister, he was assigned a separate lab. And the assistant was the other man who came back with them. He still remembered that when his sister arranged for the two of them to be together, their reactions were a little excited. But in the end, his sister forcefully suppressed it. Although he wasn't sure what the relationship between the two of them was, since his sister had already given the order, she must have her reasons for doing so. Yan Huiguang lowered his head slightly. His overly long bangs covered most of his face, making it difficult to see his expression. But even without looking at his expression, one could feel a cold and gloomy aura emanating from his body. Hearing Lin Hao's question, he slightly raised his head. Then he sneered and said, "If it was so easy to make progress, would humans still need to worry about those things?" It meant that there was no progress. However, the tone of his voice couldn't be any better. Lin Hao looked at him, then turned to look at Leng Xiantong. The two of them did not react to his harsh tone because Lin Xiao had already greeted them before. This was a man with a rather eccentric and awkward personality. Fortunately, Lin Xiao reminded them in advance. If he didn't, with the tone of the man in front of him, with Lin Hao's explosive temper, there would be, then no more. What a joke, wasn't he a level 7 dual ability user? Was he looking for trouble? If the other party was in a bad mood, he would lose his life if he wasn't careful. So Lin Hao could only shrug his shoulders and say to him with a fake smile, then you can do it. As Yan Huiguang's assistant, Shui Mingjun also sat on the side. After hearing Lin Hao's words, he couldn't help but glance at Yan Huiguang and said, "Then you can turn into a zombie, that way you don't have to worry too much about those things." When Yan Huiguang heard this, his originally gloomy face immediately darkened. Shui Mingjun was mocking him that he couldn't even turn into a zombie now. Because ever since he drank the zombie transformation potion and was stopped by that woman, he couldn't turn into a zombie anymore. No matter if he drank the potion or found a real zombie to bite him, he wouldn't have any reaction. What did that female zombie do to him? Yesterday, he was still studying his blood composition and the results he obtained were very strange. As for the biological project that Lin Hao and Leng Xiantong were thinking of ways to study, he actually hadn't started on it yet. After hearing Shui Mingjun's words, he immediately replied with a snort, "If it wasn't because of that female zombie, I would have long become a zombie." His voice was filled with strong resentment towards Lin Xiao. Lin Hao and Leng Xiantong looked at him strangely. It was the first time they saw a human so eager to become a zombie. Because turning into a zombie means death, and humans have a sense of fear towards death. Leng Xiantong slightly lowered his eyes. He didn't want to become a zombie, but he was very grateful to Lin Xiao for bringing him this current situation. Because with her here, he could release his wife and son who had turned into zombies, instead of being frozen like before. They wouldn't be like those ordinary zombies outside, who tragically lost their humanity, rationality, soul, and personality. Because of Lin Xiao, his zombie wife and son were very obedient and could even get along with him peacefully. They could even help him and help him do things. This was a scene that he didn't even dare to dream of. He didn't expect that there would be someone who didn't want to be a human and would rather be a zombie. Alright, after seeing the various high-level zombies in this base, Leng Xiantong suddenly felt that being a zombie wasn't that bad after all. His strength increased, he wouldn't be afraid of the cold and heat, and he didn't need to rely on food to maintain his life. As long as he had an energy core, he could stay alive. Without waiting for the two of them to finish lamenting Yan Huiguang's values, Shui Mingjun at the side said coldly, "That's true, who asked someone to be so weak? 2 level 7 abilities, and he actually needs to rely on becoming a zombie to increase his strength. Speaking of which, even if those experimental zombies of yours become zombies and retain their original ability levels, it's not that great." Lin Hao and Leng Xiantong silently shifted their gaze in Shui Mingjun's direction at the same time, their expressions a little strange. The atmosphere between the two of them seemed a little strange. Because of Shui Mingjun's words, Yan Huiguang's expression was getting uglier and his aura was getting more and more oppressive. He felt that there was something fishy about the relationship between the two of them. Speaking of which, what was their relationship before? Chapter 1208. Yan Huiguang didn't respond to Shui Mingjun's words this time. He snorted and shifted his gaze outside the window, then fell silent. Leng Xiantong and Lin Hao looked at each other. They didn't understand why the atmosphere was like this. Grudge? Grudge? Although the smell of gunpowder was a little strong, there didn't seem to be any killing intent. Speaking of which, the two of them were arranged by their leader to work in the same lab. Wouldn't that mean they would have to do research in a cold and hot environment all day? How depressing would that be? Just thinking about the atmosphere made it seem like a fight would break out in the lab at any time. Would they blow up the lab in 2 days? At this time, Shui Mingjun turned his head and shrugged. He said to Lin Hao, "There's no point in asking him. He hasn't been studying those things for the past 2 days." Lin Hao, speaking of which, was it really safe for his sister to put this person in his hospital? Wouldn't she turn him into a zombie? In the end, the research meeting turned into a discussion between Lin Hao, Leng Xiantong, and Shui Mingjun. Yan Huiguang's face was cold and gloomy the whole time, and he didn't participate in their conversation. This rhizome was found in the cave of a creature that crawled out from the ground before we came here. It was brought back by our leader. This fruit that looks like a fruit will release a gas when it is pinched open. Those creatures will die after smelling it. We originally thought that these things would have some effect on the other creatures that our leader brought back this time, but the experiment proved that it didn't work. Leng Xiantong took out the rhizome and handed it to Shui Mingjun. Although Shui Mingjun wasn't a researcher, his observation skills were very strong. As long as he was given enough information to understand the situation, his keen observation skills might be able to discover something else. At the same time, in the almost deserted Earth Dragon base, there was still a group of people struggling to stay behind, unwilling to go anywhere else. After Hidden Cloud City in the southwest was breached by Lin Qiao, the people of Hidden Cloud City gave up on the Earth Dragon base in order to protect themselves. A large number of survivors went to Skyfire Base and Huaxia Base, as well as Sea City and Universal Base. There were less than 100 people left in the Earth Dragon base, but these people were only left with broken limbs, leaving bloodstains on the ground and walls. Crunch, crunch. The sound of chewing could be heard from several places around it. A monster the size of an SUV slowly walked around the pool of blood. It lowered its head to look for some human arms or legs that had been bitten off. When it found its target, it stuck out its tongue and rolled the human limbs into its mouth full of jagged teeth. Then, with a tilt of his chin, he began to chew. However, this type of enormous creature with a black crown on its head that looked 30% like a pangolin wasn't the only one in this area. Instead, it was a group of them, scattered around, searching for something. Aside from the Earth Dragon base, where all traces of human life had been wiped out, Skyfire Base City was under siege by a swarm of giant beetles. Each of these large beetles was extremely large, like a giant moving safety helmet. There was a hard shell on its back. The bottom and front of the shell could not be seen, but there was a gap there. The gap looked like a chrysanthemum, and its tentacles were constantly trembling. Countless iron legs emerged from the bottom of the shell. Their movement speed was very slow, but there were a lot of them, and they were very strong. They could directly smash through a floor of a building and climb over it. At this time, the thick city wall that was specially built after the apocalypse had a few huge holes on it. Other than these hundreds of beetles that looked like hard hats covering the ground, they moved like bulldozers. There was also a smaller type of zerglings with long hind legs that jumped around on the back of these beetles. Jaji, jaji. These zerglings could also let out a strange sound that was very loud and ear-piercing. It could also cause people's consciousness to become fuzzy. Bang bang bang. Tut tut tut. Boom boom. Chaotic explosions and gunshots could be heard everywhere in the base. Ah, save me. A human was bitten by a human-sized zergling, then he screamed in fear and despair. Bang bang bang. His companion immediately fired at the zergling that was biting him. However, the bullets only flew halfway before the zergling suddenly jumped and disappeared. Ah, what was left was the miserable scream of the human that it had bitten and disappeared with. Captain, we don't have many weapons. What do we do? Someone shouted in panic. We must hold on. We must wait for them to find a way out before we retreat. Otherwise, running around will only lead to death. A relatively calm voice came. Captain, what are these things? Why are our abilities completely useless against them? Someone cried out in despair. Who knows? You should be glad that these beetles are afraid of bullets and bombs. Save some ammunition and try to dodge. The captain said in a flustered and exasperated manner. Who knows where these beetles appeared from? They were clearly dozens of kilometers away from the base yesterday. Who would have thought that they would arrive here in just a few hours? The beetles' crawling speed was clearly not as fast as a human's walking speed. How could they crawl dozens of kilometers in just a few hours? The zerglings' jumping speed was also very fast. In the blink of an eye, they could jump from here to there. Moreover, they could jump 20 to 30 meters high. They could also jump tens of meters to 100 meters. They rarely left the back of the beetles. Even if they left, they would quickly jump back. Moreover, as long as they left, they would definitely attack the humans. The zerglings' attacks were also very simple. They would directly pounce on the humans, bite them, pick them up, and jump away. Therefore, the beetles that crawled into the base closest to the humans were already covered in blood. The zerglings began to gather on the beetles' backs to eat the humans. After eating, they would jump away and the next batch would quickly jump back. Found it. We found a way out. Quickly follow me. A sudden shout immediately ignited everyone's hope. They all moved closer to that person. Finally, while fighting, they followed that person and quickly retreated. If we escape from here, where do we go? A survivor that escaped asked blankly. What nonsense are you saying? Of course we will go to China. That place is very close to us. Moreover, the defensive equipment is also very advanced. The captain with the strongest willpower immediately said. But China's requirements to enter the city are too high. Most of us might not be able to enter. Everyone was somewhat hesitant. I have a method. You guys don't need to worry about it. When we reach there, I will naturally let you in. In any case, it was not certain if you could survive to China. You guys just need to be my meat shields on the way. Therefore, everyone was in a daze and could only blindly follow the leader towards China's base. Chapter 1209. At this time, in the Huaxia base, Sikongchen was sitting in his office looking at a report with a straight face. Xie Longyun sat on the sofa in his office, crossing her legs and leaning against the back of the sofa, trimming her nails. Her beautiful eyes stared at her hands, and her rosy lips moved. She said, "Speaking of which, is it really useful for you to take our resources to exchange for these weapons from abroad? I really don't understand, are the weapons we make that bad? Do you need to exchange with other countries?" Sikongchen slightly raised his eyes and glanced at her, then lowered his eyes and said, "Why is it useless? If we can integrate the characteristics of their weapons into our own, then wouldn't we be able to increase the power even more? Look at these things that have appeared recently. You should understand the importance of weapons now." Xie Longyun's hands paused, but she said, "But I think our weapons are not worse than theirs. As long as the people in your research base can grow some brains, it won't be difficult to increase the power. And don't you know how short of food we are now? The nutritional value of vegetables from soilless cultivation is not high, and the output is pitifully small. But to provide 3 meals a day for the entire base of more than 1 million people, I don't know if you have calculated how many people will starve to death. Although weapons were important, if they could make good weapons themselves, why would they exchange food with others for weapons? If they didn't have food to eat and clothes to wear, what was the use of weapons? They would probably starve to death before the crisis outside invaded them." Sikongchen said indifferently, "What does it matter? In the era of the law of the jungle, those who can't adapt can only be eliminated. As long as we don't starve to death, why should we care about others?" Xie Longyun said, "Don't forget that you are the leader of a base. You have to be responsible for the lives of the survivors in the base. Otherwise, why would people come to seek your protection? If there weren't such a large number of survivors, where would you find so many technicians to improve the strength of this base? If you don't pay attention, don't wait until everyone runs away to regret it." Sikongchen didn't have any reaction to her words, and said with an expressionless face, "I didn't want to let so many people in at the beginning. Wasn't it the decision of the other directors to let them in? If they wanted to leave, then leave. Smart people would know which was safer, the Huaxia base or the Haiqing base. So they definitely won't leave. In their hearts, even if they starve to death here, it's better than being eaten by zombies or mutated beasts. Xie Longyun knew he couldn't get through to him, so he could only change the topic. Right? Didn't you say that the bandit would come looking for you? Why aren't they here? Sikong Chen flipped through the information in his hand and said, he won't be able to come. He was taken away by that woman in the universal base. Xie Longyun's expression froze, then she looked up at him. Surprised, he said, she dares to do that? She actually allowed the bandits to join her base? What a joke. Are you stupid? None of the bases would allow the bandits from the apocalypse to join them, because 9 out of 10 of them were cannibals and had already lost their humanity. Letting this kind of person into the base would only be a hidden danger. Sikong Chen didn't say anything this time. Obviously, he didn't want to answer her. Xie Longyun put away the nail file, then bent down to pick up the coffee cup on the coffee table in front of her. She elegantly took a sip, then put it back. Isn't that good? Send this news to her small base. Let's see how she'll be able to protect a small base with only a few thousand people. Then she will definitely join Haiqing. That way, Haiqing will have 2 level 8 metahumans. What's in it for us? Sikong Chen said coldly. Xie Longyun sneered and said, even if she doesn't join, with her relationship with Wu Qingyue, and the distance between the 2 bases is only about 100 kilometers. What's the difference between that and Haiqing base? Also, I don't know what tricks that woman used to make Wu Qingyue agree to her building a base more than 100 kilometers away from Haiqing. Could it be that Wu Qingyue's personality has changed? Is he not going to continue being a monk? Sikong Chen calmly said, as long as she's still in her universal base, I will have a way to prevent her from rushing to Haiqing to help. At this moment, Wei Haichao knocked on the door and walked in with a document in his hand. He looked at Xie Longyun and smiled. Oh, Beauty Xie is here too. Are you not busy? Xie Longyun looked up and smiled coquettishly at him. I'm very busy. It's just that great leader Sikong cares about me, so he asked me to take some time out for tea. Wei Haichao's heart softened from her coquettish look, but he maintained a graceful smile on his face. Oh, then you should thank our leader. He cares about you so much. As he spoke, he walked over to Sikong Chen and handed him the document in his hand. Wu Qingyue has encountered a very interesting situation. Do you want to take a look? Sikong Chen looked up at him in confusion. He reached out to take the document and asked, what's the situation? He has a son. He's only a month old, but we don't know who the mother of the child is, Wei Haichao said curiously. What? Before Sikong Chen could react, Xie Longyun had already exclaimed, you said Wu Qingyue has a son? Where did he come from? Wei Haichao turned to her and spread his hands. He frowned and said, how would I know? I'm still investigating. But his recent behavior is a little strange. It seems that he often leaves Haiqing to stay in that base. Sikong Chen stared at the document in his hand as he listened to him. Although his expression was still stiff, his tone was a little surprised. Where did he get a son? Is this true? Don't tell me you've gotten fake information. As far as he knew, this man had no interest in women. Last year, wasn't he tricked by that woman in the base? He heard that he got rid of that woman at that time. In the end, not only was she alive and well, but she also suddenly built a base. Even his arcana skyrocketed to level 8. Who was the one who said that the woman depended on a man to survive? If he didn't guess wrong, this woman must have been hiding her ability before. As for being a man's lover, although a lot of information and evidence clearly showed that she had slept with those men. But the more it was like this, the more unreal it felt. How is that possible? I heard that there were people who saw the child. Many people suspected that the child was born by the female leader of the base, but according to the situation of the female leader in the past 10 months, there didn't seem to be any signs of pregnancy, Wei Haichao said as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. Chapter 12:10. Sikong Chen put down the documents in his hand, then leaned against the back of the chair with his hands crossed in front of his chest. He said thoughtfully, hasn't he been chasing that woman before? Is it possible that another woman gave birth to a son for him? Or, is it possible that he picked up another son? Because he had already picked up a daughter, it wasn't strange for him to pick up another son. Wei Haichao thought it was possible after hearing what he said. He nodded. Although that's true, but I wonder if he found a surrogate mother in his base? Impossible. Xie Longyun denied on the sofa. He already has a daughter, why would he need to find someone else to be a surrogate mother? Doesn't he treasure his 6-year-old daughter very much? In that case, there's no need to find someone else to be a surrogate mother. With his temperament, I don't think he would do such a thing. It's not like he has to have a son, he doesn't need to do this at all. The two men looked at her, and Si Kong Chen was silent. Wei Haichao replied, maybe, he just wants a son to take over his position? After all, men still want to carry on the family line. It's not strange to let their bloodline be passed on to the next generation. Xie Longyun glanced at him with her silky eyes and said, your logic is a bit strange. Since Wu Qingyue already has a woman he likes, why doesn't he let the woman he likes give birth to a son for him? And let another woman give birth to a son? Isn't that strange? Or are you that kind of man? You don't let the woman you like give birth to a son for you, but find another woman to give birth to a son for you? Then she stared at Wei Haichao up and down as if she was looking at a scumbag. Wei Haichao was immediately embarrassed by her gaze. He subconsciously denied, how is that possible? I'm not that kind of man. Who knows? I'm not familiar with you. Xie Longyun withdrew her gaze, shrugged her shoulders and raised her eyebrows. Then she picked up the cup on the coffee table and took a sip. Wei Haichao inexplicably felt wronged. So, apart from Wu Qinyue's 1-month-old son, is there any other news? Si Kongchen asked Wei Haichao. Wei Haichao shook his head and said, their material procurement work is very confidential. Our informants didn't have any useful information. Ever since we lost contact with those 2 diaries, there hasn't been any news from them. Si Kongchen frowned and said, haven't those 2 diaries already fallen into Wu Qinyue's hands? Do you want to snatch it from his hands? Wei Haichao lowered his head in annoyance and said, I didn't expect it to be all because of a woman. In the end, Wu Qinyue found out. Si Kongchen's gaze was calm as he said indifferently, since the item is already in Wu Qinyue's hands, it is impossible to take it back. Wu Qinyue isn't an idiot. How could he give you such an important thing? Meanwhile, Leng Xiantong had taken the contents of the 2 diaries for research. However, he didn't manage to find any useful information at the moment. At this moment, someone came over and asked him to take a look at the 2 notebooks. I heard that the leader gave you 2 plant research diaries from Huaxia. Can I have a look? Are you done? Shui Mingjun stood outside Leng Xuantong's research room and raised his head to ask Leng Xiantong, who was called out. You can, but I can only lend you one for now. I'll lend you the next one after you're done. But can you understand it? Because it's all very academic stuff. Leng Xiantong nodded but hesitated as he looked at him and asked. Shui Mingjun smiled and said, it's okay. I'll remember it after reading it once. It might not be of much use now, but in the future, when I understand more about these creatures, I might be able to give it a try. No matter what, it's better than doing nothing. Leng Xiantong thought about it and agreed. Anyway, his focus was still on studying the energy and substances in these creatures. He didn't really need it at the moment. Since Shui Mingjun wanted to take a look, they were doing the same thing anyway. Maybe he could find something that he didn't notice. Sometimes, when an outsider sees something, there will be a surprise that comes by accident. After giving the first half of the diary to Shui Mingjun, Leng Xiantong returned to his own research room. In his research room, other than the 2 zombies, there was also the Bao family's sister. Leng Xuantong's zombie wife was already level 3 because she drank the energy lake water left by Lin Xiao almost every day for the past year. Therefore, her appearance had recovered a lot and her hair was glossy. Other than the fact that her eyes were pure black and her lips were purplish black, she was basically no different from a human. His son's condition was a little slower. He didn't know why. Anyway, it definitely wasn't because of age. Look at the leader's subordinate, Xiao Si, he was already a level 6 king. Bao Xiaogua stood outside the research room and guarded diligently. Occasionally, he would turn his head to look at the situation in the research room. Most of the time, the little zombie would play with him at the door. Inside, he would sometimes interfere with the work of the adult. Thus, Leng Xiantong chased him out. Although Leng Xiantong would shout at him fiercely every time, Leng Xiantong was still able to chase him out. Then he would be slapped on the back of his head by his mother before he was chased out. Leng Xiantong's wife was called Qi Lanxing. She was a violent female zombie. She had a bad temper too. She would beat up her son for no reason. Department head, was your wife like this when she was still a human? Bao Xiaoying, who had short hair like a boy and was wearing a white research robe, saw Qi Lanxing, who often chased her son away, and quietly reached out to ask Leng Xiantong. Leng Xiantong was bending over and staring at the microscope. When he heard her question, he replied without moving, I didn't like to fight as much as I do now. At most, my Hedong lion roar was more powerful. Now that I've become a zombie, I should say that I'm more wild? Or has my nature been exposed? Fortunately, he had a level 5 ability now. He could completely suppress his wife, who was only level 3. Fortunately, Qi Lanxing had recovered some of her memories and personality. She was still very polite to him. Because their research room was actually at the second base, Leng Xiantong didn't really restrict his wife and child's freedom. As long as the mother and child didn't run too far away. The little zombie that ran out of the research room started to stare at Bao Xiaogua again. He stood 1 meter away from Bao Xiaogua. He raised his pale face and stared at Bao Minguo with a pair of black eyes that looked like he had been punched twice. Because Bao Xiaogua's body smelled very good, it really wanted to eat him. But his mother wouldn't let him eat. Also, this human would release a very scary black flame to scare him. Xiao Shu, you'll get hungry standing here. Go away, go away. Every time Bao Xiaogua saw him standing in front of him, he would say to the little zombie in a bad mood. This little zombie couldn't resist the temptation and bit him a few times. But he didn't become a zombie because of it. Later on, he awakened the black flame ability like their leader. As long as he released a small flame, this little zombie would automatically retreat. Chapter 12:11. As soon as the little zombie heard Bao Xiaogua's words, it immediately raised its hand and pulled down the eyelid of one of its eyes. It stuck out its tongue and made a face at Bao Xiaogua. Then it turned around and ran. At this moment, there was a sudden explosion in the second lab next to the research lab. Bang! The few of them were shocked at the same time and immediately turned their heads to look in that direction. Then, they all ran towards the door of the second lab. After they ran into the second laboratory, they saw that one of the containers with the experimental bodies on the experiment table had exploded. The glass shards and the liquid inside exploded everywhere. Even the different types of tanks that were placed together with it exploded. Fortunately, not all of them exploded. The experiment table was also a mess. There was only one that had completely exploded. What happened? What's the situation? Bao Xiaogua and Bao Xiaoying came in and looked at the scene in shock. Don't come closer. Leng Xiantong stopped them with a serious expression and stopped them from coming closer. He walked over carefully and carefully searched through the mess. Soon, his gaze was fixed on a corner. Then he slowly leaned over and squatted down. The Bao siblings saw his action and understood that he must have found something. Then, they stared at his position and couldn't help but lean over curiously. They saw a piece of rotten meat the size of a baby's palm that had turned black. It changed color? Isn't this the one you soaked with the liquid of the mutated catnip and that kind of root plant? Bao Xiaoying looked at the piece of black meat and revealed a thoughtful expression. Then she raised her head and looked around before walking to the experiment table to look at the label. In the end, she saw that it was a mixture of catnip and root plant. It was used to soak the meat of the underground creatures to see if there was any reaction. The table and the experiment cabinets in the lab were filled with many underground creature experiments that had different plant or animal tissues added on. Leng Xiantong stood up and found a utensil and tweezers to pick up the black meat and put it in the utensil. Then, he turned around and walked out of the lab. Littling, clean up the mess and change the liquid from the cracked test subjects, he said as he walked out. All right. Bao Xiaoying responded and then turned her head to chase the others out. Okay, you guys go out too. There are glass shards everywhere. Be careful. Lung Xiantong brought the piece of black meat back to the lab and started to analyze the reason for the change in the meat and the explosion just now. When Lin Xiao woke up, 3 days had passed. As soon as she woke up, she immediately let go of Wu Qingyue's hand and got out of bed. Mama, Papa is awake. Cheng Ting quickly sensed the change in their energy and immediately said to the others in the living room. Xiao Liqing, who was sitting on the sofa, was looking at some information. When he heard Xiaotingting's voice, he immediately raised his head and looked towards the bedroom door. Lin Xiao threw the powder left behind by the beast core into the trash can, then clapped his hands and walked out of the room. Behind her, Wu Chengyue also opened his eyes at this time, but he did not immediately sit up. Instead, he turned his head to look at Lin Xiao, only to see her back as she opened the door and walked out. How many days have we been lying in bed? Lin Xiao rubbed his long hair and asked when he saw 1 adult and 2 children in the living room. 3 days. 3 days. Xiao Liqing and Cheng Ting both spoke at the same time, while Wu Yueling, who was next to her, extended 3 fingers to her. Lin Xiao raised her hand helplessly and used her thumb and index finger to open the temples on both sides of her forehead. Then she walked towards the bathroom with a dark face. It was all Wu Qinyue's fault that caused her to delay her pace for 3 days and waste another 3 days. After washing his face and changing his clothes, Lin Xiao went over to pick up his son, then sat down and placed him on his lap. She looked down at him and asked, "Who cooked for the 2 of you these 2 days? Was it Uncle Xiao or Auntie Duan?" "Auntie Duan." "Auntie." Teng Tang and Wu Yueling answered her one after the other. Seeing that Lin Xiao asked about eating, Xiao Liqing turned his head towards the window with a subtle expression. However, Teng Teng pointed at him and said with a look of disdain, "Uncle Xiao's cooking is simply unpalatable." Wu Yueling only covered her mouth and snickered. "What? Although my cooking isn't very delicious, it's not to the point where it's unpalatable." Xiao Liqing, who was despised, couldn't hold it in anymore. He immediately turned around and glared at Ting Ting. At this time, Wu Chengyue walked out of the bedroom and said lightly, "Compared to me, it's indeed unpalatable." After saying that, he floated over and entered the bathroom. Xiao Liqing, they really were blood-related. Their thoughts were the same. "Tife, why do you care so much? As long as you can eat it, it's fine as long as you don't starve to death. It doesn't matter if it's delicious or not. Besides, we often go to the base for missions, so we eat dry food and cooked water. How can you be so pretentious as to care about the taste?" Even if the father and son were blood-related, he couldn't stand being ridiculed like this. Lin Xiao touched Ting Ting's head. His originally smooth head already had some stubble. But because he was only a little more than a month old, his hair was still soft. Therefore, it felt a little fluffy and very comfortable. She felt like she was stroking a cat after stroking it a few times. "Then who helped you bathe and wash your clothes? Is it also Auntie Duan?" Lin Xiao asked Ting Ting. "She's only in charge of cooking. I'm in charge of serving these 2 little devils," Xiao Liqing said without waiting for Ting Ting to answer. "Pa." Wu Yueling, who was beside him, didn't like it when he called her a little devil, so she immediately slapped his thigh. "Oh no, it's little baby." "Alright." Xiao Liqing turned his head and saw her puff up her little face. He immediately changed the way he addressed her. At this time, he turned around and handed a document to Lin Xiao. He said, "This is the meeting invitation from Huaxia this morning." The document was an invitation. Lin Xiao took it and opened it. Then, she threw it on the coffee table without a care. The number of people this year is a little less. There were 7 leaders last year, but now there are only 5. She tugged on Teng Teng's sleeve and sighed. "Cough, it might not be good to have more people." Xiao Liqing looked at her with a strange expression. Actually, what he wanted to say was, "The number of people is also caused by you. When will it be over?" Wu Qingyue also changed her clothes and walked out. Then, she walked to the coffee table and picked up the invitation to look at it. Mid-December. It was about the same time as last year. Chapter 12:12. When Duan Wan arrived at Lin Xiao's house, she was naturally happier to see the 2 awake. But what made her happier wasn't this, but the information in her hands. Look, Lung Xiantong said that catnip has a huge reaction to these creatures. He also found different levels of mutation to experiment and found that the lower the infection, the better the effect. If we can find the level of no infection before the apocalypse, then the experiment will definitely have a good result. Hearing her words, Lin Xiao immediately asked her to pass the information to him, then he opened it and looked at it carefully. Wu Qingyue walked closer to her and carried little Tingting out of her arms, then stood beside her and looked down at the information in her hands. That means the purer the effect, the better? But after the second outbreak, the plants outside have already mutated 99.8%. Where can we find something that isn't infected? Wu Qingyue frowned slightly and said, this result was equivalent to nothing. But what he was concerned about was, then what's the best effect on Lung Xuantong's hands? Duan Wan's expression turned cold at this moment, then she sighed and said, he has used up all his experimental subjects, he's about to ask the leader to send someone to capture some alive. But the best effect he has now is the mixture of catnip and the rhizomes that can numb a small area. Numb? Wu Qingyue heard her and looked at the information in Lin Xiao's hands. Lung Xuantong's experiment report wrote, it can numb, but it doesn't last long. Using the catnip solution that can be collected normally can only numb for more than 10 seconds. But the duration of the effect is different depending on the degree of infection. The lower the infection, the longer the numbness. That was why Lung Xiantong said that if they could find a pure catnip without infection and mutation, it might even be able to paralyze the monsters to the point of death. Can't it be purified? Lin Xiao frowned slightly, but quickly relaxed. In any case, this was good news. Why don't we go take a look first? At this moment, Xiao Liqing said impatiently. Sure. Lin Xiao immediately stood up and glanced at Wu Qingyue and little Tingting. Then he reached out and carried little Tingting back, one hand holding his little but the other holding his back, and walked out. The others immediately followed. When he arrived at Lung Xuantong's research institute, Shui Mingjun had just arrived and was about to return his research notes. But when he arrived, he learned about catnip. What did you say? Looking for fresh, uninfected catnip? Where can I find fresh catnip that hasn't been infected before? Shui Mingjun looked at Lung Xiantong in confusion. But only the scent of the fresh catnip can keep them away. Also, only the mixture of this plant's juice and the rhizome of this plant will be useful to those creatures, Lung Xiantong said to him. Letting Shui Mingjun, the intelligence specialist, do the job might be better. Now that almost all the plants outside have mutated, it's impossible to find uninfected catnip, and they're not cats. Why would he react to this kind of thing? Shui Mingjun's expression was still confused as he looked at him. If they were cats, they would only be more excited, not scared, and avoid them. And they wouldn't fall into a state of paralysis after being hit by this kind of thing. Lung Xiantong smiled. After hearing what he said, Shui Mingjun thought about it and felt that it seemed to be the case. That's true. But it's impossible to find a pure one, we can only look for one with a lower infection rate. Speaking of which, I remember that the place where this plant is grown is distributed in many places. Let me think, the closest place to us, the neighboring Minnan province has it. At this moment, Qi Lanxing, who had been silent, suddenly turned around and roared at Lung Xiantong, then pointed outside the door. Lung Xiantong heard her voice and looked at her movements and realized something. He immediately walked towards the door. What's wrong? Shui Mingjun followed behind him in confusion. He didn't understand why the female zombie roared and pointed. Chief, they're here, Lung Xiantong said. As he spoke, he suddenly stopped and said to Bao Xiaoying, Littling, go to my desk and get the latest information. After Lung Xiantong and Shui Mingjun left the lab, they stood in the corridor of the research institute and waited for the door. Not long after, they saw a few people walk in. I still have a few living underground creatures here. Can you take them for an experiment and show me? Lin Xiao said to Lung Xiantong as soon as she saw him. There's more? That's great. I'm lacking some right now. Lung Xuantong's eyes lit up when he heard her say that. Lin Xiao and the others brought the two kids here. The people in the research institute all stared at the baby Tingting curiously. Lung Xuantong's zombie son hid behind his mother's thigh, Then he tilted his head and looked at Wu Yueling curiously. It wasn't because of the aroma coming from Wu Yueling that made him hungry, but because he finally saw someone shorter than him. Maybe it was the nature of a child. There was always a strange attraction when they were around the same age. Wu Yueling became very quiet when she saw the strangers, and she stuck close to Lin Xiao. She didn't even want her father anymore. When Lin Xiao heard Leng Xuantong's response, she passed her son to Wu Qingyue. She didn't say anything, but Tengting understood what she meant. Then bring me to your special detention room, I'll release him, Lin Xiao said to Leng Xuantong, then walked towards the corridor. Although she asked him to bring her there, she had been here before, so she knew where it was. When they arrived at the detention room, the walls, floor, and ceiling were all smeared with the liquid from the rhizome that Lin Xiao brought back from the underground gorilla cave, and it was even diluted. There was a huge cage in the middle of the room, and the metal cage was also smeared with this liquid. Therefore, when these creatures were released, although they would roar violently, they didn't dare to get too close to the edge of the cage. If they roared for a long time, they would force themselves to be quiet. Lin Xiao walked to the side of the cage, stood by the side, and entered the forest in the space. Then, she brought out an underground gorilla that had fainted from hunger and threw it into the cage. Roar! The underground gorilla that was the size of a normal wild boar immediately roared weakly when Lin Xiao brought it out. But very quickly, it was agitated by the smell of the surrounding rhizome plants. Roar, roar, roar. Although it was agitated, its four legs were a little unstable. It swayed left and right for a while before stabilizing itself. Chapter 12-13. The underground gorilla that was released by Lin Xiao was injected with a mixture of catnip and rhizome plant by Leng Xuantong with a needle. The originally restless and roaring gorilla instantly fell to the ground and stopped moving. I don't know if the catnip will help Yuan Tianxing's condition. Give me some, I'll try. Lin Xiao stood in front of the window outside the cell and thought of this problem. So she asked Leng Xuantong for a tube of the catnip solution. Leng Xuantong nodded and asked Bao Xiaoying to bring a tube of catnip solution to Lin Xiao. Do you guys still want to follow me? Shouldn't you be going back to Haiqing? Lin Xiao took the solution and walked out of Leng Xuantong's lab. She immediately turned around and asked Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing. She still had a lot of things to do, so she obviously wouldn't bring Wu Qingyue. So it was time for him to leave. He had been in her base for so long. Did he think this was his home? Well, I really should go back. Wu Qingyue saw that she had blatantly driven him away, so he could only obediently return his son to her. Then he asked Xiao Liqing to prepare a car to go back to Haiqing. Lin Xiao sat in the car and said to Duan Wan, "Let's go to Mount Wu first." Duan Wan looked back at her blankly. "Aren't we going to test the medicine on Deputy Leader Yuan first?" Lin Xiao hugged Tengting and rubbed his head, but Tengting was annoyed and slapped her hand away. "No, let's bring Lu Tianyi and his people into the space first. The food in the space is rotting." Lin Xiao played with Tengting while replying to Duan Wan. "Okay." So it was like this. Duan Wan drove the car out of the second base to the Wu Mountain plant base. Lu Jun and Xie Dong were already waiting at the intersection. "Where's Lu Tianyi?" Lin Xiao carried Tengting out of the car and asked Lu Jun. Lu Jun pointed in a direction and said, "On the mountain." Lin Xiao nodded and walked towards the small wooden house. While walking, she said, "Send someone to call him and his people over." Lu Jun nodded and waved to the side. A level 5 zombie leader, level zombie, walked towards her. After Lu Jun gave the order, he immediately flashed in the direction that Lu Jun had pointed out to Lin Xiao. When Lin Xiao and the others arrived at the open space in front of the cabin, Tong Tong ran out of the cabin. After seeing Lin Xiao, his expression froze for a moment before he suddenly quietened down. "Hello, Auntie Lin." He stood outside the door and greeted Lin Xiao, then carefully looked at his mother. Lin Xiao glanced at Tong Tong and nodded at him with a smile. Tong Tong seems to have grown a lot taller. Children grow quite fast. Tong Tong then dared to slowly walk towards Xie Dong. However, his eyes were fixed on little Tengting. "Do you want to play with little Tengting? Come over and hug him." Lin Xiao said to Tong Tong as he looked at the longing in his eyes. Tengting was a little worried. He put his arms around his mother's neck and said, Brother Tong Tong can't carry me, can he? He didn't want to fall to the ground. Lin Xiao looked at him. How do you know if you don't try? Hearing Lin Xiao's call, Tong Tong walked over to her with some eagerness. After hearing Tingting's words, he stopped in his tracks at a loss. Then he revealed a conflicted expression. He had never hugged Tingting before. Previously, it was Lin Xiaolu and Wu Yueling who carried him. It was because they were older than him and had more strength. However, looking at Tingting's short body, Tong Tong felt that he should be able to carry him. Maybe, however, seeing that Tingting seemed to dislike him, Tong Tong was a little timid. Lin Xiao didn't give him time to hesitate. She directly carried Tingting in front of him. She said encouragingly, "It's okay. This kid is very light. If you can carry him, you can ask an adult to carry him when you can't." As she spoke, she handed Tingting over to Tong Tong. Although Tong Tong did grow faster than the average child, he wasn't too heavy. Although this kid was a little fat when he was born, he was only about 8 kilograms. Now, he was only about 5 kilograms. Tong Tong could carry him. Seeing that Lin Xiao suddenly brought Tingting over, Tong Tong instinctively reached out to hold him. Change like this. You have to hold his butt and hold his back so that he won't fall. After Lin Xiao taught him how to carry him, she threw her son to Tong Tong. At this time, Lu Tianyi also came over with a group of zombies. Because a few days ago, Long Qingying chased Kong Qingming back to Haiqing, Lu Tianyi left his work behind and came back. However, he still had to continue to help him, to let him pick up girls. Come. Hurry up and prepare things. The strawberries in my space are rotten. And vegetables. Lin Xiao saw him and immediately called out. Lu Jun and Xie Dong began to help her prepare a bunch of empty baskets. Lin Xiao put them all into her space. Then, she sent Lu Tianyi and the row of level 4 zombies behind him into her space and let them harvest vegetables and strawberries. I need to solve one of Yuan Tianxing's problems first. After that, Xie Dong, gather all the level 5 chieftains and level 6 kings who are ready to level up at the encampment. The rest can wait until next time. I will take them into the space to help them level up. Tell them to prepare their energy cores. Lin Xiao said to Xie Dong before entering the space. Yes. Xie Dong immediately turned around and left. Lin Xiao turned her head and looked at Tingting, who was still in Tong Tong's arms. She said to him, "You play with your brother outside. I will come out to pick you up after I finish." Oh, got it. Tingting looked up at her and nodded. In order to make it easier for Tong Tong to hold Tingting, Duanwan found a small stool for him to sit on. That way, Tingting wouldn't fall easily on his lap. However, Duanwan and Lu Jun were watching him from the side, afraid that something might happen to him. After Lin Xiao entered the space, she saw that Lu Tianyi and his level 4 subordinates were busy in the vegetable field. Some were picking beans, some were picking melons, some were picking strawberries, and some were picking vegetables. Speaking of the first strawberry field that Lin Xiao had planted, it had already spread to a large area. After not picking for more than 10 days, those big and plump strawberries were already ripe. Because there was no season in Lin Xiao's space, there was the energy in the air and the special soil. These plants kept growing and growing, the kind that wouldn't stop. When she appeared, the zombies only turned their heads to look at her and then continued with their work. Lin Xiao waved a cloud of black mist to cover herself. Then she took off her clothes and threw them on the chair by the lake. Then she jumped into the water with the black mist and dragged Yuan Tianxing out after a while. After putting on her clothes, she took a piece of clothing and covered Yuan Tianxing's important parts. Then she took out the tube of medicine that Leng Xiantong gave her. Chapter 12:14. Throwing Yuan Tianxing on the grass by the lake, Lin Xiao directly opened his mouth and poured the mutant catmint into his mouth. Then she squatted beside him and stared at his body with narrowed eyes. At this time, Lu Tianyi slowly came over curiously and asked her with a puzzled expression, "I always felt that you were too close to Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng's family. Did you know them before?" In fact, he had always been very strange. Seeing the atmosphere between his sister and the Lin family, he felt that something was wrong. They were too familiar. But why was that? But he never knew when Lu Tianyu had contact with those people. He had been secretly paying attention to her and protecting her after the doomsday. He knew most of the things she did. But he just didn't find out that she had contact with the Lin family. Was it before the doomsday? Lin Xiao saw that after the mutant catmint entered Yuan Tianxing's body, it turned into a green energy that spread from his stomach. After hearing Lu Tiany's words, she was stunned, then turned her head and looked at him silently. Lu Tiany looked at her expression and knew what she wanted to say. But after waiting for a long time, he saw that she was still looking at him quietly and didn't speak. She clearly had something to say, but she didn't say it. What did she want to do? What's wrong? Is it hard to say? Lu Tiany asked her more curiously. No. Lin Xiao immediately turned her head and continued to observe Yuan Tianxing's situation. How could she say that apart from this body and this face? She was no longer Lu Tianyu? Wasn't his sister? Lin Xiao couldn't say it. She felt that if Lu Tiany knew that she was no longer Lu Tianyu, he might be very sad. After all, this was a family member that he sincerely protected. Even if Lu Tianyu didn't treat her as a family member, he still cared about her. But after a long time, he would know one day. After all, everyone knew, but he was the only one who was kept in the dark. This way, Lu Tiany seemed very pitiful. At least he had to know that the family member he was guarding now only had a body, but his soul was gone. But she was hesitating whether to say it to him herself or let someone else say it. Then you haven't answered my question just now. Lu Tiany looked at her and continued. Lin Xiao could only sigh and stand up when he saw that he was not going to let go. Looking at him, she said, "Do you want to know? Perhaps you don't want to know the truth." Lu Tiany looked at him calmly, and the expression on his handsome face did not change. He just looked at Lin Xiao, his eyes as calm as water. Although his expression was calm, the words that came out of his mouth didn't mean much. "Your words have given me a bad premonition." Lin Xiao looked at Yuan Tianxing on the ground and replied, "What did you think of?" She watched as the green energy lasted for a few seconds before it was quickly devoured by the black energy with flashing red spots. "I think you should tell me yourself. After all, the real Lu Tianyu would never want to take care of others. Especially unrelated people," Lu Tiany said and glanced at Yuan Tianxing on the ground. Then he turned around and left calmly. His last sentence meant that if it was the real Lu Tianyu, even if he could build his own base. But he wouldn't do this for the survivors in the base. At least, she wouldn't care about Yuan Tianxing's current situation. Lin Xiao, this guy had already noticed something was wrong. He was only asking her now so that she could give him an answer personally. It seemed that she had to expose him. She didn't know how he would react. But since he already had some doubts, probably it would be easier for him to accept the truth, right? Lin Xiao looked at his back as he walked towards the vegetable field and sighed again. Then she turned her head and continued to stare at Yuan Tianxing's body. Although the green energy was quickly devoured by the black energy, if she didn't see it wrong. Before the green energy of the mutated catmint was completely devoured, it had a tendency to melt the black energy. It was just that the green energy was too little, so it was completely devoured by the black energy that was thousands of times more. This was the source fluid with the lowest degree of mutation that Lung Xiantong gave her. In other words, she could only find a purer catmint to save Yuan Tianxing and deal with the underground creatures outside. But where could she find a plant that was so clean that there was no trace of infection in this apocalypse? Although she knew it was impossible, there was always hope. What if a miracle happened? She had to believe that miracles could happen. After seeing the energy of the mutated catmint disappear, the black energy began to stir again without the suppression of the lake's energy. Lin Xiao hurriedly threw the naked man back into the lake to suppress him. Speaking of which, if this guy knew that she threw him around naked, what would he think? She came out of the lake again and put on her clothes. Lin Xiao took a dry towel that someone had prepared on a chair and wiped her hair while walking towards the small building. "Since you want to know, then come in." When she got close to Lu Tiany, she stopped, looked at him and said, then continued to walk into the small building. Lu Tiany, who was squatting to pick the lettuce leaves, raised his head and looked at her back as she walked into the small building. Then he stood up and gave the basket in his hand to a nearby subordinate. Only then did he start walking towards the small building. After entering the living room, he saw Lin Xiao sitting on the sofa and rudely rubbing her wet hair with her head tilted. "Sit down first." Seeing Lu Tianyi standing in the open space in front of the coffee table, Lin Xiao couldn't help but look at him and pointed to the single sofa next to her. Lu Tianyi quietly looked at her, then walked over and sat down. Then he straightened his back and put his hands on his legs. He spoke first. "Say it." Lin Xiao looked at him, and her hands stopped moving slightly. Then she continued to rub and said, "After so long, it seems that you have already found out. In fact, you already have the answer in your heart. Do you really want me to say it? I'm afraid that you will be sad." Lu Tianyi's eyes slightly dropped to the coffee table. Hearing her say this, he suddenly showed a trace of a bitter smile, and the smile was full of sadness. He said, "But, knowing it sooner or later, won't I still have to know in the end? Do you think I will feel better if most people know and I am the only one who doesn't know?" Lin Xiao looked at him and didn't know what to say for a while. She could only remain silent for the time being. Lu Tianyi stared at the coffee table for a while, and the atmosphere between the two suddenly fell into a subtle state of silence. After more than 10 seconds, he asked, "Who are you?" Chapter 12:15. I'm still your sister, whether it's in the past or now. Lin Xiao looked at him and answered his question. But then she said, "Of course, if you don't want to accept it, then there's nothing I can do." Lu Tianyi looked up at her, his eyes were a little sad but fierce. "I want to know your identity. Since you're not Lu Tianyi, then what's your name?" He had long suspected that this female zombie was no longer his sister, although at first he thought that her personality had changed because she suddenly became enlightened after dying once. But the longer he got along with her, the more he found that there was something wrong with her. Gradually, he couldn't reconcile her with the previous Lu Tianyi, and he began to find that the two of them were completely different people. It wasn't until he died that he had a dream. In the dream, he dreamed of the scene of Lu Tianyi's death, just like the news he had received. She died under the bite of a group of zombies. Her screams, her cries of despair, and with her personality, she would definitely curse a few times before she died. Then he woke up with a start, then sat on the bed with a face full of sweat, shouting and hurriedly thinking about Dawn. Finally, he understood one thing. Why did Lu Tianyi's behavior, style, personality, and temperament become different after she became a zombie? That was because the real Lu Tianyi had died a long time ago. The one who became a zombie wasn't his biological sister. Then who was it? After having doubts, he began to look for clues from the current zombie sister. Why did she care so much about Lin Feng, Lin Wenwen, and the others? Because she seemed to have gone all the way to Hades' base to find them. Why could she understand Yuan Tianxing and the others with just a glance and a gesture? Why was she so persistent in building her own base? Lin Xiao felt the fluctuations in his mood, then sighed and said, "You've already guessed it, haven't you?" But Lu Tianyi stubbornly said, "I want to hear it from your own mouth." It was as if she didn't say it herself, and the facts he found out were all fake. Even if he didn't believe it was true, after dreaming for a long time, it would make him feel out of place. Then what everyone else knew, he was the only one who didn't know. Didn't this make him look stupid? Was he so weak that he couldn't find out the truth? Even if he knew that Lu Tianyi was hiding it from him out of goodwill, she wouldn't be afraid that he would take revenge on her for occupying her sister's body. That was why she refused to tell him. It was all for his sake. But it was time for him to wake up. No matter how realistic and pleasant the illusion was, it was all fake. One day, it will disappear, and the truth would always exist. Lin Xiao looked at him and asked, "Why? Is it not good to think of me as your sister? At least now I see you as a younger brother. I also think of you as a sister, but as a sister, I can't treat the two of you as the same person. Since you're not my biological sister, you should at least tell me who you are, right? Is it necessary for you to keep lying to me? Not everyone wants a white lie. I only know that it's time for me to see it clearly." Lu Tianyi put away the sadness on his face and returned to his somewhat overly calm expression. "Since you've said so, that's fine. That's right, I'm not Lu Tianyi. She is indeed dead. I am Lin Xiao. I am Lin Feng's sister, Lin Wenwen and Lin Hao's sister, and the former leader of Hades base. But Lin Xiao is also dead, but she woke up from the dead Lu Tianyu's body for some reason. Lin Xiao could only admit it. She pushed the hair in front of her forehead to the back, revealing her entire face. Lu Tianyi suddenly raised his head and looked at her. His eyes were fixed, a little dull and a little confused. More of a sudden helplessness and sadness. You see? You want me to say it again? If I say it, you'll cry again. Lin Xiao looked at him speechlessly. Lu Tianyi subconsciously lowered his head to wipe his eyes, but he couldn't wipe anything. He said angrily, I'm not crying. Do zombies have tears? Lin Xiao rolled her eyes at him, then pointed a finger at his heart and said, Who said that you have to shed tears when you cry? Do you know that your heart is crying? Lu Tianyi looked down at his heart, then pressed his right hand there. However, he said stubbornly, I'm not. Lin Xiao stood up, then walked to his side and patted his shoulder. You're the one who made me say it. I've said what I need to say, and you know what you want to know. I'm still going to say the same thing. I'm still your sister, and I'm still going to treat you as my second brother. Anyway, one more won't make a difference. As for whether you can treat me as your sister, it's up to you. After all, this body is your sister's. We have the same bloodline. Well, we are zombies with the same bloodline. After saying that, she withdrew her hand, turned around and walked to the empty space in the living room, then disappeared. Lu Tianyi was left alone, sitting there quietly. After Lin Xiao came out, she finally felt relieved, then looked at Xie Dong and the others in front of the small wooden house. Behind him stood a row of Tier 1 kings, and there was only one Tier 1 king. There were 4 Level 5 leaders, Jing Yan, Yan Xiao, Lu Mingsong, and number 5 female zombie, Azure. Are these the only 5 who are going to level up? Lin Xiao looked at Xie Dong and asked. These are the only 5 who are going to go out with us. There are still some left in the base and the second division outside the base. Xie Dong replied. Lin Xiao nodded. Well, then let's go with these few. Right now, it's already 4 in the afternoon, there's still an hour before Xiaoting starts eating again. Let's help Imo level up first. Wait for me. After saying that, she suddenly thought of something and disappeared. After a few minutes, she reappeared with a small bucket of milk in her hand. Xiaoting should be hungry at 5. Help me heat up this goat milk to feed him. Because she didn't know how long it would take for her to go in and help Imo level up. Oh, okay, got it. It won't make him hungry. Lu Jun smiled and took the small bucket from her hand. In any case, she had a son to take care of. Since Xiaoting was here, she should feed both of them together. After hearing her nod, Lin Xiao walked to Imo and the others. Have you prepared your energy cores? All the zombies nodded. Then Lin Xiao turned around and said to Xie Dong, You go first. Oh, right, cough. Did you bring underwear? Other than preparing the energy cores, it's better to prepare underwear first. Because my lake is a bit dark. After saying that, she looked at the other zombies with a smile. All the zombies, Xie Dong, pfft. Lu Jun couldn't help but cover his mouth and laugh. Chapter 12:16. While Lin Xiao was busy improving the strength of his men, Lin Wenwen, who had returned to 7 years ago, spent a night at the seaside and went for a jog the next morning. By the time she came back, it was already bright and the sun had risen. She walked through the lobby and took the elevator back to her room. She took a refreshing shower and changed into a cool set of clothes before taking her phone and keys down to the dining room for breakfast. Xin, over here. As soon as she entered, she heard someone calling her. She looked up and saw that it was Qin Jiao, the woman waving at her. She leisurely walked over, pulled out the only empty seat and sat down. We've eaten all of this and it's cold. You can order more of what you want. Dong Lijia waited for her to sit down and said to her. Then, he turned his head and waved his hand to call the waiter over. Lin Wenwen followed his order and ordered her favorite food. Then, she began to eat. Looking at the leftover plates on the table and their lazy looks, she knew that these people were full. Xin, you didn't bring your bag down? Lin Yuehui looked at her left and right and suddenly asked curiously. Lin Wenwen replied concisely, I didn't bring it. Then, you didn't bring clothes on the boat? We're going out after eating, or are you going to go to the room to get something after breakfast? Lin Yuehui asked her in confusion. No, I didn't bring clothes. Lin Wenwen took a sip of the delicious shrimp porridge and said faintly. Bring what clothes? You can wear what you're wearing? Dong Lijia saw that Lin Yuehui kept asking Lin Wenwen, so he couldn't help but ask curiously. Oh, nothing, I just wanted to ask if Xinshin wants to wear a swimsuit. Because all of us girls have brought our own. Didn't you also bring swimming trunks? Qin Jiao answered for Lin Yuehui at this time. If you like it, then wear it. If you don't like it, then don't wear it. Anyway, we don't need to swim on the boat. We're just barbecuing, fishing and enjoying the sea breeze. What's the matter? When Dong Lijia heard her say so, he waved his hand carelessly. Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui looked at each other and knew that they couldn't say too much at this time. They didn't want to attract other people's attention and find out that something was wrong. However, the two of them glanced at Lin Wenwen with a fake smile. Displeasure flashed in his eyes. Last night, he had spent so much saliva to send her that set of fatty swimsuit, but he didn't expect her to not bring it out today. When did Dong Xinshin become so opinionated? Didn't she always do whatever they said in the past? Did she discover the problem with the swimsuit? But that was impossible, right? Most people wouldn't be able to tell. What's more, Dong Xinshin, who had a low IQ, was even less likely to see through it. Yeah, I didn't plan to wear a swimsuit today. The weather is so hot, the sun is so big. Why are you wearing a swimsuit? Lin Wenwen said as he picked up a steamed bun with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. Her words successfully made Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui's expressions stiffen, but they quickly hid their true expressions. Qin Jiao smiled awkwardly and said, But didn't you promise us last night that you would wear it? Lin Wenwen turned his head and looked at her with a puzzled expression. When did I agree? It was you who forced that swimsuit on me, wasn't it? Although the style is very suitable for me, I don't like to wear defective clothes. It should at least be sturdy, right? And I don't understand, why do I have to listen to you and wear a swimsuit? Can't I wear it if I don't like it? Her words made the two women's expressions more and more ugly, and the others shifted their gazes to them. It was because Lin Wenwen's words clearly indicated that the two women seemed to have some ulterior motives against her. But she didn't take it seriously, and she directly tore the swimsuit they gave her. Lin Wenwen's words, at least be sturdy, explained this point. But this also explained another point, that was, the swimsuit was tampered with, so she tore it. Those who understood this instantly had a good impression of Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui. Even if they were beautiful, they didn't necessarily like these kinds of women who were too scheming. Dong Lijia stared at the two women for a while, and his expression was thoughtful. He knew that these two women liked to give suggestions to Dong Xinshin, but he never thought about what these two women were thinking when they gave suggestions to Dong Xinshin. He thought that these two women really treated Dong Xinshin as a friend, or at least as an ordinary friend. Now it didn't seem like it. No wonder they always instilled some strange aesthetic views in Dong Xinshin. It made his Xinshin wear a tight skirt and want to wear high heels. He hadn't noticed that something was amiss before. After noticing everyone's gaze, Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui immediately panicked, and with a guilty expression, they explained, No, we were just afraid that you would want to wear it but feel embarrassed. And we were afraid that you wouldn't choose a good one, so we specially picked a suitable one for you. Hehe, did you accidentally tear the swimsuit we gave you? It's okay, you can buy a new one. Do you guys not understand human language? I said I don't want to wear it, don't you understand? You still want to buy a new one. Hehe, I don't want to wear it, why would I buy a new one? To admire it? Lin Wenwen looked at her with disdain, as if she was looking at a retard. Then she suddenly turned to Dong Lijia and the others and said, In the past, you need to be careful when you make friends, and you need to be careful when you make a girlfriend. Don't be soft-hearted when you see a beautiful woman, at least look at her inner qualities. When she heard what Lin Wenwen said to Dong Lijia, Qin Jiao exploded. She couldn't control herself and slammed the table. She stared at Lin Wenwen and scolded, Dong Xinshin, what do you mean? Are you saying that we don't have inner qualities? We have been helping you as a friend, and this is how you treat us? Don't be agitated, don't be noisy. Everyone was shocked by Qin Jiao's slamming of the table. Luo Yuanjun immediately sat up straight and tried to calm her down. If you really treat me as a friend, you wouldn't be thinking of ways to make fun of me all day long. You say it like it's real. I'm full, you guys continue. Dong Lijia, where's the boat? Lin Wenwen said to Qin Jiao in disdain, then stood up and turned to look at Dong Lijia. I'm also full, I'll go with you. What about you guys? Dong Lijia immediately stood up and glanced at the others, but he didn't look at Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui anymore. Everyone got up and left the table, only Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui sat there with dark expressions. Chapter 12-17. After Lin Wenwen and Dong Lijia walked out of the restaurant, Lin Wenwen approached Dong Lijia and asked him softly, "These two women are pretending to be nice to Dong Xinxin. Can't you see it?" Dong Lijia glanced at her, his gaze a little surprised. Then he suddenly understood and said, "I didn't know before. But I see that Xinxin is really happy with them. And she seems to be more cheerful. That's why he accepted the two women hanging out with Dong Xinxin. In fact, every time he saw these two women, it was because of Xinxin. But he really couldn't tell that these two women didn't treat Xinxin as a friend. It was as if they had an ulterior motive to get close to her. Why are they doing this? This one is pretending to be close to Xinxin, but she doesn't have good intentions. Did Xinxin offend them before? Dong Lijia asked in confusion. What else? They just want to get close to you and me. Xinxin is just being used. Who told her to be your sister? At this time, Deng Chunfei's faint voice came from behind. Dong Lijia turned around and looked at Deng Chunfei, who was already beside him. Then he looked back and saw that the others had come out. Get close to us? Hearing this, Dong Lijia's eyes flashed. Thinking about it, it seemed to be the case. Qin Jiao seemed to like talking to him. Thinking about it again, Lin Yuehui also liked to appear by Deng Chunfei's side. They had seen this kind of woman many times. If they came for them from the beginning, they would have found out long ago. But these two women were very scheming. They didn't get to know them first, but went to get to know his sister first. Not long ago, when he first met Qin Jiao, she had a surprised expression on her face. She asked him if he had a sister named Dong Xinxin or something. He felt strange and surprised, so he chatted with her for a while. They didn't come out. Luo Yuanjun looked back and saw that the group of people had already walked some distance away, but the two women hadn't come out yet. Tsk, they still have the face to come out? Didn't you see their expressions just now? I saw it. It's the resentful expression when someone sees through your scheme. Dong Lijia rolled his eyes at him. Luo Yuanjun shrugged and couldn't help but say, women's thoughts are really strange. Your thoughts aren't normal either. Lin Wenwen rolled her eyes at him and couldn't help but retort. Sai, what did I do to you? Why are you scolding me? Luo Yuanjun was a little unhappy when he saw her scolding him. Lin Wenwen glanced at him coldly. Luo Yuanjun immediately felt a slight pain in his eyes, so he shrank them back. Fine, do whatever you want. I don't fight with women, Luo Yuanjun said as he turned his face away. They won't be so thick-skinned this time, right? But speaking of which, what's with the swimsuit you were talking about just now? Dong Lijia glanced at the back again before turning back to look at Lin Wenwen. Last night, they brought a swimsuit into my room and said a lot of things. They just wanted me to wear it on the boat today. But the outer gauze of the swimsuit is not waterproof. It's fine when it doesn't come into contact with water, but if it comes into contact with water, it may fall off. I think they are waiting for me to put it on before accidentally pouring wine on me or accidentally knocking me into the water or something. Then the gauze will fall off, and you can see the swimming ring on my stomach. Lin Wenwen pouted. Dong Lijia looked at her speechlessly. They would do such a thing? What good would it do them? And they seemed to be trying to hide it just now. Didn't they want to use Dong Xinxin? Since they were already close to Dong Xinxin, they could pretend to be her friend or something. But what good would it do them to embarrass Dong Xinxin? Lin Wenwen glanced at him and didn't say anything. The good thing was to vent the disgust in their hearts. The two women looked at Dong Xinxin as if they were looking at a trash can. They didn't like Dong Xinxin, but they wanted to hook up with Dong Lijia and then marry him in order to be the daughter-in-law of the Dong family. On one hand, Qin Jiao forced herself to be friends with Dong Xinxin, but on the other hand, she was annoyed and disdainful of Dong Xinxin. So she secretly wanted to use some tricks to make fun of Dong Xinxin. After all, seeing her embarrass herself would make them feel happy. And at the same time, they could also vent their anger, right? At this time, another girl in the team who didn't have much presence appeared next to Lin Wenwen and asked her, "You didn't notice their pranks before. Why are you suddenly awake now?" Although this girl came with them yesterday, she didn't talk much to Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui. She didn't seem to be very familiar with them, but she was more familiar with the oil prince, Xiao Hanfeng, because she was brought here by Xiao Hanfeng. Hearing her question, Dong Lijia, Deng Chenfei, and Luo Yuanjun immediately looked at Lin Wenwen with a subtle look, and then looked away at the same time. Lin Wenwen turned her head and looked at the girl, then smiled and said, "Recently, there was an expert who suddenly taught me, so I became sober." After experiencing 7 years of the apocalypse, if Dong Xinxin still didn't become sober, then he would have wasted his time in the apocalypse. They found a ship dealer and rented a luxury cruise with a small swimming pool. After asking people to prepare all kinds of things, everyone boarded the ship. However, when they were about to board the ship, the two women shamelessly appeared again. "Did you forget about us? You didn't even call us. I'm so sad." Lin Yuehui pouted, holding a parasol, and looked at Dong Lijia and the other boys. Lin Wenwen had already boarded the ship. Hearing her voice, she looked back. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. These two women were really shameless. They actually dared to come. The atmosphere was so awkward just now, wouldn't it be even more awkward now? Lin Wenwen ignored them and found a corner in the cabin to sit down. She took out her phone and began to search for information about catnip. Since she wanted it fresh, she definitely had to find the place where it was grown. However, it was more troublesome to buy fresh catnip, and it needed to be cultivated and grown. It was even inconvenient to pack and transport it. She might have to go to the local cultivation base in person to buy it. She searched online and wrote down all kinds of contact information. Then she began to contact them on QQ and WeChat. Well, there was one more thing. She had to borrow money from Dong Lijia again, the kind that she didn't have to pay back. Thinking of this, she immediately got up and went to find Dong Lijia. Seeing Dong Lijia and Luo Yuanjun standing at the edge of the railing, she walked over and pulled him aside. "Lend me some money again," she whispered to him. "Why?" Dong Lijia asked her in confusion. "To buy something. What else can I do?" Lin Wenwen couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. "Of course I know you want to buy something. I just want to know what you want to buy this time." Dong Lijia couldn't help but fight back. Chapter 12:18. Lin Wenwen straightforwardly refused and replied, "You don't need to know. Just transfer the money to me. Quick, I need it urgently." Dong Lijia reluctantly looked down at her and said, "How much?" "Transfer me 1 million first. I'll pay you back if it's more," Lin Wenwen said. Anyway, this kid was rich. 1 million was nothing to him. Moreover, they had recently sold off some of their shares and properties at a low price. They would slowly sell them out in 1 or 2 months as soon as possible. Then, they would use the money they received to buy supplies, food, cars, steel, iron, guns and bullets. Well, they had a lot to buy anyway. Moreover, Lin Wenwen asked them to seal the food layer by layer and then put it on the 5th or 6th floor. They couldn't put it on the ground floor, and they couldn't hide it in the basement. Dong Lijia took out his mobile phone and transferred the money to 2 different banks. Then, he asked curiously, "What do you want?" "Thank you. Don't worry about it," Lin Wenwen said to him and slipped back into the cabin. Then, she began to contact people. She contacted many plantation owners. Excluding those that had already been ordered, there wasn't much left for her. And she wanted fresh ones. Therefore, Lin Wenwen could only gather the quantity from one shop to another. In 2 days, she would personally go to those places to collect the goods. After Lin Wenwen's meal in the morning, Qin Jiao and Lin Yuehui avoided her for the whole day. Then, they continued to stick to Dong Lijia and Deng Chenfei shamelessly. As men, Dong Lijia and Deng Chenfei couldn't be too rude to these 2 women or do anything to them. They could only roll their eyes and avoid them while enduring these two women. In fact, Dong Lijia's attitude changed the most. This was because Deng Chunfei wasn't interested in the two women from the beginning. In addition to his indifferent personality, there wasn't much change from before. The others either played by themselves or watched them. Lin Wenwen even went up to fish with the girl who had a low sense of presence. In the end, the girl caught a squid, and Lin Wenwen caught a lot of fish. Seeing that the two had a lot of harvests, the others began to become interested. They all took out their fishing rods and sat on the side of the boat. The boat quietly floated in the deep sea a few hundred meters away from the shore. While fishing, he barbecued on the boat. The fish that they caught just happened to be roasted on the barbecue rack. After playing for an entire afternoon and basking in the sun, although they had all applied sunscreen, everyone still became a little darker. He had caught the fish and eaten the barbecue. In the afternoon, they returned to the shore and had another meal of seafood in the restaurant. On the third day, they flew back to their respective homes. However, Lin Wenwen did not go back with them. Instead, he went to another province. Where is she going? Seeing Lin Wenwen get on the plane first, Luo Yuanjun approached Dong Lijia and asked. I don't know. Dong Lijia was browsing on the computer and replied without raising his head. Come. You look like you already know. Tell me what happened to her. Luo Yuanjun pressed his eyes and suddenly thought of what he and Deng Chunfei had asked her that night. So, he started to ask Dong Lijia again, unwilling to give up. Dong Lijia's fingers that were sliding on the screen paused. He looked at Luo Yuanjun and Deng Chunfei, who was sitting opposite him. After some thought, he said, I'm afraid that you won't believe me if I tell you. Forget it. Deng Chunfei looked at him thoughtfully. He then exchanged a glance with Luo Yuanjun, who turned around and looked at him. The siblings had been really weird lately. Lin Wenwen boarded another flight. After the plane landed, she hailed a taxi and rushed to her destination. The taxi drove for more than an hour before they reached a town. A middle-aged man came out to pick her up. When he saw her, he was slightly stunned. He was a little surprised that the customer was so young. Are you Miss Dong? The middle-aged man stood at the entrance of his shop and looked at Dong Xinshin, who got off the car. He hesitantly walked up to her and asked. Lin Wenwen nodded. Yes, I am. You must be Boss Huang. The middle-aged Boss Huang nodded. Oh, I am. When Lin Wenwen called him by his name, Boss Huang confirmed that it was really her. He politely extended his hand to shake Lin Wenwen's hand. Can you take me to have a look at your herb garden? Have you prepared the goods that I want? Lin Wenwen asked him directly if he had prepared his own goods. Boss Huang didn't expect that a girl who looked like she was only 17 or 18 years old could speak so maturely. He nodded repeatedly and said with a smile, All right, please follow me. I'll drive you there. It's not far from here. It's only a few kilometers away. Lin Wenwen got into the back seat of his SUV. After driving for more than 10 minutes, they arrived at a large nursery garden in the suburbs. There were many ornamental plants and flowers planted there. Boss Huang's nursery garden had expanded quite a lot, and the business was quite good. The customers were all relatively stable and regular customers. Lin Wenwen hugged her bag and followed Boss Huang into the nursery garden. After walking for a few minutes, they saw a row of bungalows. Boss Huang pointed to one of the bungalows and smilingly said, We originally planned to give this batch to a pharmaceutical factory, but the factory was suddenly closed down some time ago. It's possible that they produced some illegal drugs, so we plan to provide these catnip to another manufacturer. I didn't expect that you would snatch it first. Thank you. I'm really in a hurry, so I'll be buying more for a while. If you can get more in the next batch, please leave some for me. I want more. Lin Wenwen heard him make a small joke, so he said to him with a smile. After arriving at the room, Boss Huang opened the door and saw more than a dozen bags of catnip inside. He went up and opened the bags for Lin Wenwen to check before asking someone to seal it back. After paying the remaining payment to Boss Huang, Lin Wenwen loaded the dozen bags of catnip into Boss Huang's car and sent it to the town. Then, she asked him to help send the catnip and herself to a remote intersection near the provincial capital. After that, she drove the driver who was worried that it would be unsafe for a little girl like her to stay here. Then, she took the opportunity to put all the catnip into her space. Dong Xinshin in her mind finally couldn't help but ask her, "Why did you buy so many catnip?" Lin Wenwen walked to the provincial capital a few kilometers away. While walking, she told Dong Xinshin, "I'm going to bring them back to the apocalypse." Dong Xinshin curiously asked, "Does this catnip have any special effects? Otherwise, why would she bring them from 7 years ago to 7 years later?" Lin Wenwen said, "Yeah, these might be the hope of mankind's survival." Dong Xinshin was puzzled. "How do you know these are the hope of mankind in the apocalypse?" Lin Wenwen replied, "Maybe you'll know after 7 years. Speaking of which, we'll probably meet again after I go back." Dong Xinshin replied, "Maybe." Chapter 12:19. She went to several places and bought thousands of kilograms of fresh catnip. Then she asked someone to deliver them to the roadside and put them into her space when there were no cars passing by. She also bought a bunch of seeds, thinking that she could plant them in her sister's space. Because her space could only store things, there was no land and water, so she couldn't plant them. Because of her request, Dong Lijia didn't let the bodyguards follow her. Because it would be inconvenient for her to move around if someone followed her, so she had to send them back. When Lin Wenwen returned to the Dong family, several days had passed. There were less than 70 days before the apocalypse. After returning, she continued to help Dong Xinshin lose weight. After more than 20 days, Lin Wenwen could clearly feel that Dong Xinshin's body was much firmer, and it was no longer as soft as it was in the first few days. Recently, she always had dreams when she slept at night, and most of the dreams were scenes after the apocalypse. The sky was filled with sand, and the sky of the abandoned city was covered with dark clouds. The streets were dilapidated and messy, and the zombies with rotten clothes and twisted faces slowly paced back and forth. There were also mutated trees and mutated beasts that flew past from time to time on the side of the road. Familiar but unfamiliar scenes intertwined in her mind until she woke up in the morning. As a result, every morning when she woke up, she exuded a depressed atmosphere, and her face would only improve after a whole morning. "What's wrong with you recently? You look more and more dispirited after coming back." Dong Lijia looked at her strangely while eating, and couldn't help but ask, "Yes, I see that you don't look well these days. Or, is there something wrong with Xinshin's body?" Mrs. Dong put down her chopsticks and asked her after hearing Dong Lijia's words. Since Mr. and Mrs. Dong knew that there was another person living in Dong Xinshin's body, after so many days of digestion, they had gradually accepted this strange situation. Although it was their daughter's body, the soul was an outsider that they didn't know. Mr. and Mrs. Dong were always very awkward. But they still paid attention to what they should pay attention to. After all, this body was still their daughter's. They always felt that she was like a split personality of their daughter, strange but couldn't be ignored. "Well, it's nothing, I just haven't been sleeping well recently. Xinshin's body is fine, it's good. Oh, by the way, she asked me to tell you that her condition is much better now. I reckon that after a while, she will be able to switch control of this body with me. At that time, your daughter will slowly come back." Lin Wenwen was eating in a daze. After hearing their question, it took him 2 or 3 seconds to realize that they were talking to him. Then are you going to leave soon?" Father Dong looked at her hesitantly and asked. Lin Wenwen shook his head and said, "I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on with my situation. It'll take some time." The 3 members of the Dong family looked at each other. They all agreed and continued to eat their own food. After lunch, Lin Wenwen took a leisurely stroll in the pavilion in the backyard. As she walked, she suddenly felt her vision darken. She lost control of her body and the world spun around her. The 2 bodyguards behind her rushed over when she suddenly fell to the ground. "Second miss." In the end, their second miss's eyes were tightly shut and she had already fainted. Lin Wenwen felt her vision blur, and she suddenly saw a scene in front of her. It was an indoor room, a room with no windows, only 4 walls and a sealed ceiling. The materials of the walls, ceiling, and floor were very strange. They were not normal materials. The room was not big, about a few dozen square meters. There were no furnishings in the room, but a woman was lying in the middle of the floor. The moment she saw this woman, Lin Wenwen suddenly felt a pulling force from the woman's body, pulling her in. This was her own body. The first thing she felt was that this was her own body. But after entering her body, she could not wake up because she felt a surge of energy in her head. Then she felt a sense of being overpowered, as if she had to break through this overpowered feeling to be able to recover. Was she going to advance? Lin Wenwen was not unfamiliar with this feeling. This was the premonition that her ability was going to advance. But to break through this shackle, she still needed a lot of external energy to attack. So Lin Wenwen immediately took out a level 3 beast core from her space, held it in her hand, and began to absorb it. When Dong Xinshin woke up, she found that the feeling she had when looking at the ceiling was different. It was not the illusory feeling but the real feeling. Previously, when she saw things, it was like watching a 3D movie. The feeling of not wearing glasses was not real, and it was a little illusory and floaty. But now, she felt that the images she saw were no longer illusory, but real. What did this mean? Dong Xinshin's eyes suddenly lit up, and in the next second, she felt control of her body and limbs. She turned her head to look at her parents and her older brother. Then, she sat up abruptly. The 3 people in the room were looking at her nervously. When they saw her wake up, they looked at her with concern and asked, "How are you? Are you okay?" But before they could finish, Dong Xinshin sat up suddenly. Then she hugged Dong Lijia, who was standing by the bed, and shouted, "What? Brother? I'm back!" Woo-woo, Dong Lijia was startled by her hugging and cursing, but when he heard her tone of voice and the meaning behind her words, he suddenly froze. Then his expression changed, and he looked down at Dong Xinshin in surprise. "Xinshin?" Dong Xinshin looked up at him with tears in her eyes, bit her lips, and nodded at him. Dong Lijia looked at her familiar expression, and his heart warmed, and his nose became a little sour. Mr. and Mrs. Dong both turned their heads in surprise and looked at each other. Only then did they realize what was going on. After hugging Dong Lijia, Dong Xinshin pushed him away again. Then she threw the quilt away and rushed out of bed to hug her mother. It's me. That's great, I can finally hug you in the flesh. Mrs. Dong subconsciously hugged her. Maybe she was infected by Dong Xinshin's emotions. She patted her daughter's back and comforted her. Okay, don't cry. What us? Haven't we always been fine? Dong Xinshin calmed down a little, and finally realized that she was a little too excited. At this time, she controlled her emotions, wiped the tears on her face, and then sniffed and said in a choked voice, "Well, you died after the end of the world. Everyone died. Only Luo Yuanjun and I survived. Woo." Chapter 12:20. After Lin Wenwen absorbed a 3rd and 2/4 level beast cores, her body suddenly felt light, and the energy storm in her brain leisurely retracted into her energy core. Then, she suddenly opened her eyes and sat up from the ground. She stood up and looked left and right, then walked to the wall and touched it. There was a strange texture to the wall. It was as cold and hard as glass. There were no windows, not even a door. There were no air vents, but she didn't feel suffocated, and she could still breathe. What's going on? Could this be Dong Xinshin's different space? She seemed to have said before that her body was in her space, so she had returned to her own body. Did she also return to her own body? What should she do now? Could she go back now? That shouldn't be the case. Dong Xinshin's recovery didn't seem to be very strong. But now she should have returned to her own body, and she just didn't know how long she could last. Maybe she had to wait here until she couldn't hold on anymore, and then replace her. Lin Wenwen thought it through a bit, sat down, and took out a book, a bag of melon seeds, and a small flashlight from her space. In any case, she had nothing to do, so she might as well read first. Because the space was very dark, she could only use the light from the flashlight to read. At this time, Dong Xinshin calmed down after being comforted by her parents, and sat on the bed. Maybe she was too excited just now, and used a lot of her energy. So now she seemed a little dispirited. Dong Xinshin calmly sat on the bed and said to them, "Previously, there was another girl in my body. She also came back from 7 years in the future. Maybe our abilities are a little special, so we were linked together, and I brought her back. When I fully recover, I have to send her back 7 years in the future." The other 3 Dong family members looked at her with a strange expression, and Dong Lijia looked as if he was looking at an alien, and said, "You can still send someone 7 years in the future? Are you a shuttle?" "You're a shuttle." Dong Xinshin unhappily grabbed the pillow in her arms and threw it at him. Then she lowered her shoulders and said, "There are 67 days left. That day will come. Brother, help me get a pen and paper. I'll write you a list of names. You need to find these people from now on. It doesn't matter if you want to trick them or kidnap them. Bring them to our house and don't worry about the others. And our family members, some of them can't be allowed to stay either." At the last sentence, Dong Xinshin's expression suddenly became a little gloomy and sad. Those who couldn't stay were those who would turn into zombies, so they couldn't stay. Her grandfather Butler was one of them. Upon hearing her words, the 3 members of the Dong clan also realized something. Then they turned to look at each other, and their expressions became heavy. They understood that the people on the list that Dong Xinshin mentioned were trustworthy. Moreover, they would not mutate and would be able to survive the day safely. Dong Lijia went to her desk and found her notebook and pen, then asked her to write. Mr. Dong and Mrs. Dong looked at each other and wanted to ask Dong Xinshin what would happen in the future. But thinking of what Dong Xinshin had just said and her collapsed mood, they felt that it was better not to ask. In any case, since their daughter really came back from 7 years later, then she would know what had happened in the past 7 years. In that case, she would know what had happened in the past 7 years. In the future, she would just have to listen to her and do as she said. Dong Xinshin wrote and said, "There are some people I will take you to avoid them in the future. But if one day you suddenly meet them, you should also pay attention to avoid them as much as possible. For the safety of your lives." At this time, Dong Lijia finally opened his mouth and asked her, "Didn't you say there are still 2 months? Isn't it too early for us to find people now?" Dong Xinshin said, "In the last half a month, we have to leave here and go to High City first, because there will be a survivor base in High City. We need to go there and settle down first. Also, we have to hide the materials we have collected in batches. We can't take them all together." She raised her head and looked at Dong Lijia. "Brother, help me with this first. Spread out, the more the better. You can choose the location, but it can't be too far from High City. Within a range of 300 kilometers. Storing the materials in batches was good. After all, there could be all kinds of accidents in the future if they were only stored in one place." Dong Lijia nodded and said, "Okay, I will do this. Remember, hide it in a tall building and make sure it is sealed." Dong Xinshin suddenly thought of something and said to him worriedly. After she finished writing the list, she tore it off and picked it up to give it to them. "Okay, this is the list. The ones at the top are farther from us. We can first. However, when she handed the paper to Dong Lijia, she suddenly tilted her head forward halfway through her sentence. There was no more movement, and the list in her hand also floated to the bed. "Xinshin." The 3 were startled and quickly came over. But when they helped her up, they found that she had fallen into that unconscious state again. At this time, Lin Wenwen, who was eating melon seeds and reading a book with a flashlight, also froze. Then she fell flat on the ground. The flashlight in her hand rolled to the side, and the book also fell into her arms. When she woke up again, she found that the light in front of her eyes was much brighter. When she looked again, she saw the ceiling of Dong Xinshin's bedroom. "Xinshin?" Dong Lijia's voice came from the side. Lin Wenwen turned her head and saw Dong Lijia, Mr. Dong, and Mrs. Dong standing at the end of her bed looking at her. "I'm not." She sat up and denied to the 3 of them. Then she raised her hand and pressed her temple, feeling a little dizzy. As soon as she spoke, the 3 standing people immediately had disappointed expressions on their faces. Lin Wenwen understood something and asked, "Is Dong Xinshin back? How long has she been back?" She remembered that she had read more than half of the book in that small space. If not 1.5 hours, then at least 2 hours. "Xinshin woke up less than 10 minutes ago," Dong Lijia said. At the same time, he also felt relieved. Fortunately, this unknown person was not a man. When he heard that Dong Xinshin said it was a girl, he was relieved. Less than 10 minutes? Lin Wenwen showed a surprised expression. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? At this time, Mrs. Dong couldn't help but ask gently. Lin Wenwen looked at her and then shook her head. Oh, nothing. Maybe our situation is special, so it's different. Chapter 12:21. How do you feel now? Do you feel uncomfortable? Mrs. Dong sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. Lin Wenwen shook her head. I don't feel uncomfortable. I'm just a little tired and sleepy. Then you have a rest. We'll go out first. Mr. Dong looked at Dong Lijia and Mrs. Dong, and then said to Lin Wenwen with a smile. Then he turned and walked out of the room. Mrs. Dong also stood up and walked out with Dong Lijia, closing the door of the room. Lin Wenwen sighed, lay down again, and closed her eyes to rest. This time, she didn't have any dreams. She slept quietly for a few hours and woke up in the evening. Then she got out of bed in high spirits to find dinner. Although Dong Xinshin hadn't written down the people who told them to avoid, she could ask the person in Dong Xinshin's body to see if he could help to ask and then write it down. By the way, we still don't know how to call you. After all, you are Xinshin. During this time, the atmosphere between them was a little awkward, so they tried to avoid meeting and talking. Even if they ate at the same table, they didn't talk much and they didn't call each other. Only Dong Lijia would call her Te. Or perhaps he would also call her Xinshin, but it wasn't the Xinshin that he called his sister. It was as if he was calling another Xinshin. Lin Wenwen looked at Mrs. Dong's eyes and smiled. Just call me Xiaowen. I'm only a few years older than Xinshin. Okay, Xiaowen. Well, I heard that Xinshin sometimes communicates with you. Can you help us ask her for a list? Maybe she will tell you, because she suddenly fell asleep before she finished. Mrs. Dong smiled and called Lin Wenwen, then asked with some embarrassment. Okay, but she seems to be resting now. When she wakes up, she should tell me automatically if it's very important. Lin Wenwen nodded. In the following days, Dong Lijia began to transport the materials out and find a place to store them. Mr. Dong sent people to find the names, locations, and characteristics of the people on the list. Lin Wenwen continued to help Dong Xinshin exercise. Many of the clothes that were tight before were now wider. Dong Xinshin's body became thinner and thinner. This time, Dong Xinshin rested for a few days before waking up. Then she asked Lin Wenwen to help her write a list of names for her father. It seems like these people are your fated fiends. Lin Wenwen sighed after knowing the significance of this list. It was good to be able to predict the future. At least she and Dong Xinshin now knew the trajectory and experiences of their lives for the past 7 years. This way, he could avoid the ending of his previous life in advance. Dong Xinshin said indifferently, I can only say that without the control of the law, humans would return to the primitive era where the strong preyed on the weak. The law of nature was to do as one pleased. Human desires are also the strongest. For the sake of survival, no one cared about morality and righteousness. Another month passed. Finally, there was only 1 month left. Lin Wenwen had already reduced Dong Xinshin's weight by 20 kilograms. Although she was still very short, she no longer looked like a ball. It looked many times smaller than before, but her muscles were a lot stronger, and her stamina had also improved a lot. During this month, Dong Xinshin woke up in her body 3 times, and the time she stayed awake was longer than before. But every time she fell asleep, it would take a few days before she could wake up in Lin Wenwen's mind. One day, when Lin Wenwen just came out of the gym, she met Dong Lijia. Seeing his speechless expression, she couldn't help but say, You went to see those people again? Why did he have to find trouble for himself? Are you stupid? The people she was talking about were the people that Dong Lijia's father sent people to forcibly bring back. He didn't explain anything to them before he kidnapped them. The other party definitely wouldn't give him a good face. Anyway, when the end of the world came, they would understand. At that time, they would definitely be glad that he was captured by the Dong family. As for these people, They were the people that Dong Xinshin met after the end of the world. They had helped her, but they didn't end up well. There were actually not many people, only a dozen. Therefore, Dong Xinshin wanted to gather them before the end of the world. On one hand, it could protect the lives of these people in the early stage, and on the other hand, these people would be useful in the later stage. I was afraid that they would be too emotional, so I wanted to appease them. Who knew that none of them would listen to me? Apart from restricting their personal freedom, I treated them quite well. Dong Lijia said snappily. Lin Wenwen looked at him and was about to turn around and leave. Suddenly, a picture of Dong Lijia flashed in her mind. In the picture, Dong Lijia was actually in the end of the world, holding a strange gun and shooting at a group of strange creatures. She stopped in her tracks and looked at Dong Lijia's back as he walked forward with a thoughtful expression. The creatures in the picture were very similar to the ones she had seen before, but what kind of gun was it? Why didn't he use his ability? Speaking of which, she didn't know when she would find out about his body. Looking at his skillful shooting movements, it didn't seem like he had just been in the end of the world. Could it be 7 years later? At least, this kind of gun didn't appear in the past 7 years. What's wrong? Dong Lijia walked and suddenly saw Lin Wenwen stop with a thoughtful expression. She was still staring at the back of her head. Little one? Hey, stop looking. Do you still want to go eat? Seeing that she didn't respond, Dong Lijia called out again. Only then did Lin Wenwen come to his senses. He curled his lips at him and said, Was Xiaowen called for you? Do you know that you are 3 years younger than me? Who cares about you? Do you want to go or not? However, Dong Lijia didn't seem to care. He waved his hand at her, turned around and walked away. Lin Wenwen choked on his breath again. So irritated. She really wanted to hit someone. While she was waiting for the end of the world to come, and then Dong Xinshin would completely recover and send her back. On the other side of the base, Lin Qiao chased Xie Dong and the others into the lake, and then helped them level up one by one. Xie Dong successfully entered the level 2 king stage of level 7, while Yen Xiao, Jing Yen, Azure, and the others successfully entered the level 6 stage of level 1 king stage. During the day, Lin Qiao was busy increasing the strength of these high-level zombies, and at the same time, he was busy dealing with the affairs of the base. This was because Lin Feng had already gone to Haiqing. In addition, he also had to take care of his son, and at the same time, he had to control the energy in Yuan Tianxing's body. Anyway, without Yuan Tianxing, Lin Qiao was as busy as a dog. Chapter 12:22. When Wu Qingyue returned to Haiqing, he paid close attention to the underground monsters that had appeared around the city. He constantly sent people to collect information and analyze the characteristics and weaknesses of these monsters. At the same time, he was preparing to find out what was going on in the shadows in China. This time it was said that the leaders of the major bases were going to a meeting to discuss the underground creatures, but who knew what he would do behind the scenes? Although humanity needed unity to have hope of victory, with Xikong Chen's personality, it was possible that he would take advantage of the situation where everyone was dealing with the underground creatures outside to stab Haiqing in the back and destroy the base. After all, Xikong Chen's real goal was to protect the base in China. He wouldn't think of helping others. But this meeting was to discuss the sudden emergence of these dangerous monsters. He only wanted to find out if there was anything in common, or if there was a breakthrough point for others. At this time, Wu Qingyue, Xiao Yunlong, Zhou Shihui, and several of the vice leaders were in a meeting. Xikong Chen's meeting this time was to let the major bases discuss and see if there is any way to deal with these underground creatures. But he didn't give a definite time for the meeting to end. Sure enough, there must be something fishy going on. Xiao Yunlong looked at the copied invitation and couldn't help but frown. Zhou Shihui nodded in agreement. I think so too. Why don't we not go this time? I'm afraid that something will happen to the wrong people. That means the base will be in trouble. In any case, if we don't go now, Xikong Chen won't do anything to us. But if we don't go, wouldn't it be too unconventional? All the other bases will go, right? On the surface, Xikong Chen said it was to discuss how to deal with these monsters. There's nothing strange about his starting point. If we don't go, wouldn't that be bad? Xiao Yunlong wanted to agree with Zhou Shihui, but after thinking about it, he didn't think it was appropriate. He looked at him and said, Wu Qingyue spoke up at this time. I just received news today. The last group of survivors left in Zilong Base were attacked by some unknown creatures. None survived. Also, Skyfire Base has been invaded by 2 types of giant insects that we've never seen before. Now a large number of people are fleeing to China. This proved that the threat that these monsters posed to mankind was one step closer. Which human base would be the next to be destroyed? I didn't disagree with old Zhou's point. Perhaps we would run into danger if we went to Sea City. But if he went, there was still a chance of survival. After all, the discussion conference that Si Kongchen mentioned is really going on. There was strength in numbers. If they only researched in their own base, it could only be said that their progress was too limited. If they exchanged information with the other bases, perhaps they would be able to find what they were looking for in the information of the major regions, and there was a high chance that they would be able to find what they wanted. Therefore, if they didn't go, they would miss out on some important information. In this post-apocalyptic era, one more piece of information meant one more chance of survival. Therefore, even if he knew that Si Kongchen wasn't a good person, he still had to go. So fast? Didn't Skyfire have more than half of the survivors? There are at least 200,000 humans. Hearing Wu Qingyue's news, the others were stunned. Zhou Shihui looked at Wu Qingyue in surprise. Wu Qingyue nodded. That's right. I believe that in a few days, there will be a small number of survivors from the west entering our base, or the universal base. Most of them are now heading towards China, but the conditions for entering China haven't changed because of the change in environment. Therefore, only a small number of people who could enter China had the conditions. Most ordinary people didn't have the conditions to enter China. After all, they couldn't get energy cores or take out extra supplies to give to China. When he said this, the others also thought of it. After all, this situation had happened many times before. Xiao Yunlong asked him, so we're still going to China this time? Who's going? Since they knew that it would be dangerous to go, they couldn't let those who were too weak go. So Wu Qingyue said, of course I'm going. Who else is more suitable than me? Just as everyone thought it was a matter of course, he turned to Xiao Liqing in the next second. That woman at the universal base will be going, right? Everyone's expression immediately changed. Did it mean that he wanted to go mainly because his wife was going as well? Xiao Liqing looked at him with a twitch of the corner of his eye. She said she's going. And she's going to take your son with her. Wu Qingyue calmly said with a smile, look, if she goes, we don't have to worry about Si Kongchen's conspiracy. In addition to Xiao Yunlong and Kong Qingming, the other single dogs were stuffed with a mouthful of dog food by his happy smile. Oh, yeah, I got it. Go. Zhou Shihui waved his hand at him and said, remember to bring your son and wife back safely. But now we haven't found any monsters at close range outside the base. The situation is much better than the other bases. In addition to those that came out of Lake Tai, there are also the strange fire beasts that appeared in Minnan Province. They are some distance away from us. But we still have to keep an eye on the situation along the coast. I don't think the sea will be calm. Wu Qingyue picked up another report and said, fortunately, the blind underground people near the universal base have run to the West Lake, otherwise we would have to worry about one more crisis. But the situation in the cave is still a bit unclear and there are still hidden dangers. Xiao Yunlong looked at the report and felt a little lucky, but soon he showed a worried expression. But I don't know when old Yuan's situation will be better. Wu Qingyue nodded and said, although the information from the universal base says that there are some water creatures in the dark lake under the cave, we don't know if those things will come ashore. Although Yuan Tianxing has sealed that position, he didn't go to investigate other directions. I hope those things can stay in the underground lake. By the way, didn't a red monster appear outside the universal base recently? It seemed to come from the underground, but why does Miss Lu seem to not care about it? You didn't kill it? At this time, Xiao Yunlong suddenly thought of another thing and curiously looked left and right at Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing. Because these two people had stayed at the universal base for the longest time and knew the most things. And just as he mentioned the red monster, the level 6 big red cat outside the universal base came again. Chapter 12:23. Just when Lin Xiao was having a meeting with the high-level zombies who had just improved their strength, Qiu Lily rushed in again. Qiao Qiao! Qiao Qiao! That big red cat is here again. She excitedly ran in with her 2 ponytails, completely ignoring the existence of other zombies, and shouted at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao looked at her excited face and said helplessly, "It's here, why are you so excited? Did it attack you?" Qiu Lily shook her head, "No." "Then did it bite anyone?" Lin Xiao asked again. Qiu Lily shook her head again, "No." Lin Xiao said, "Then it didn't attack the base, right?" Qiu Lily wanted to shake her head, but she realized what Lin Xiao said halfway. She quickly nodded, "No, no." Lin Xiao looked at her speechlessly, "Then why are you so excited? Tell me, what did it come out for?" Qiu Lily said with a puzzled expression, "It threw a big bird outside the gate of the base, and now it's sitting next to the bird, watching the high wall of the base and not leaving." Lin Xiao said, "How big is the bird? Sitting at the gate with a bird in its mouth, watching the gate and not leaving? Why did this scene look a bit cough? Not that she was thinking too much, but it really looked like a house cat." Qiu Lily crossed her arms in front of her chest, raised one hand to touch her chin, thought for a moment and said, "Well, it's a mutated bird bigger than that 6-legged cat. And it's not dead yet, but it's being held down by the strange cat's claws, so it can't fly." Lin Xiao turned to look at the others, and they all had the same expression. She looked at the report in her hand, and there was still something she wanted to say. After thinking for a moment, she turned to Qiu Lily and said, "You go and see what it's doing from afar. If it keeps sitting there, just ignore it. Let's see how long it will sit there. Maybe if we ignore it, it will leave by itself." Last time she observed the strange cat, it didn't seem to attack people randomly, and it was a vegetarian. Although she didn't know why it was guarding the gate with a bird in its mouth, since it was sitting there without moving, it obviously wouldn't attack. Then should we close the gate? Because everyone was scared by it. Qiu Lily thought for a while and asked her again. Lin Xiao turned his head and said to Duan Wan, who was standing behind him, "Go and seal that door first. Those who want to leave can leave from another door." Duan Wan answered neatly and went out. Hearing that, Qiu Lily turned around and ran out. "I'll keep an eye on it." Lin Xiao looked at Qiu Lily's back, then said to Xie Dong and the others, "Okay, let's continue. Everyone remember, when you go out to recruit members of the army, try to choose the ones with the least bloody smell. Zombies that reek of blood are not suitable to join us." Everyone answered in unison. "I'll be bringing another batch of people to China. You'll be stabilizing your levels in the base. At the same time, be aware of any underworld creatures appearing around the base. If it appears, Jingyan, remember to look for Lung Xiantong to get the medicine. At the moment, we can't make weapons out of these potions because we don't have enough manpower. We'll have to trouble people from Haicheng to make them, but it will take time. It's best if our base is safe before the first batch of weapons comes back." Lin Xiao said the last sentence as if he was praying. Jingyan, who was called, nodded, understood. Xie Dong and Mo were the only 2 zombies that managed to advance from level 6 to level 7. The other zombies that were originally level 6 hadn't reached the stage where they needed to advance, so they could only wait. As for the ones that successfully advanced from level 5 to level 6, besides Jingyan, Lu Mingsong, Yan Xiao, and Lu Li, there were 5 others. They were the man and woman who had been with Qiu Lily since the beginning. They were male zombie number 1, Jin Jiuyang, and female zombie number 2, Yu Shaoxian. Finally, the first batch of zombies that followed her all reached level 6. It wasn't easy. In addition to them, there were 3 other zombies that had been promoted to the rank of the king of level 6. These 3 people were Lu Feng, He Jiyun, and Su Fangfang, who had completely recovered their memories. In addition, there was one of the zombies that Lin Xiao had assigned to Xie Dong. It was the one that discovered the rats but was afraid of them. From level 4 to 5, Lin Xiao didn't help all of them advance. One reason was that their merits hadn't reached the requirement, and the other was that Lin Xiao didn't have that much time. So from level 4 to level 5, she just conveniently helped the wind-type zombie that was afraid of mice. When she asked him to take off his clothes and go into the water, he was so shy. In the end, he was kicked down by Xie Dong, like a little wife. The last one is the cultivation base. You guys need to strengthen the defense. Don't put your focus on the underground monsters outside the base and forget about this place. This is also an important project of our base. Xie Dong, send the earth zombies to monitor the situation in the cultivation base every day. If there are any discoveries, we can prepare as soon as possible. Lin Xiao knocked on the table and said, "Yes." This time, it was Xie Dong who answered her, because he was also in charge of the cultivation base. Lin Xiao talked with them for another half an hour before the meeting was finally over. After coming out, she went to the resting room next door and gently picked up Ting, who was sleeping soundly. She put him in her arms and got into the car. "Go to the city gate and see what that strange cat is doing," she whispered to Duan, who was in the driver's seat. Duan looked up at the rearview mirror and didn't say anything. But Lin Xiao knew that she understood. Seeing that she didn't want to wake up Ting, Lin Xiao didn't care and looked out the window. At this time, there was a huge red cat sitting on the spacious isolation zone outside the west gate. The huge cat's front paw was pressing down on an even bigger bird. The wall gate was already closed. A group of people stood on top of the wall and looked at the two mutated beasts. Although the giant bird kept flapping its huge wings, it couldn't escape from the cat's paw. When the huge cat saw that it was struggling too hard, it would pop out its sharp claws and stab it. As a level 5 mutated bird, it wouldn't die after being scratched a few times. So when Lin Xiao arrived, it was still alive. Roar dash, smelling Lin Xiao's breath approaching, the big strange cat immediately became a little restless. It immediately stood up from its sitting position. The tens of meters long tail behind it was like a whip, swinging left and right rhythmically. Chapter 12:24. Lin Xiao carried little Ting up the stairs slowly and climbed to the top of the wall. Then he walked to the side and looked at the strange cat. Roar! Seeing Lin Xiao appear on the top of the wall, the strange cat stretched out its neck and roared at Lin Xiao. Then, it lowered its head and bit the big bird under its claws. Then, it dragged the struggling giant bird 2 steps forward and put it down. Perhaps it was bitten too hard. The bird struggled on the ground, trying to fly, but it couldn't fly no matter how hard it tried. It's like a cat. It only recognizes you. Qiu Lily saw the strange cat's actions and couldn't help but say. Then she moved closer to Lin Xiao. She had been watching for half an hour and the strange cat didn't move. However, when Lin Xiao came, it immediately moved. At this time, little Ting in Lin Xiao's arms might have smelled something strange. His eyelids moved and he woke up. Then he opened his eyes and found that he was in his mother's arms. Looking around, he found that his position was a bit high and a bit spacious. Just as he turned his head to look down the strange smell, a fiery red beast appeared in front of him. However, at this time, the strange cat suddenly roared at Lin Xiao, "Oh!" Then, it pushed the big bird forward and suddenly turned around. Then, with a flick of its tail, it bent its 6 legs and jumped. In an instant, it disappeared on the spot, leaving only a big, half-dead bird that was still there, flapping its wings from time to time. It left. Qiu Lily cried out in surprise. Her eyes widened and her mouth slightly opened as she looked in the direction where the strange cat disappeared. Then she looked at the giant bird that was left on the spot. It left its prey and ran away. Did it want to give this bird to us? Is that so? Then, she turned to look at Lin Xiao in confusion. Lin Xiao looked at her uncertainly, then looked outside the base and said, "It seems like..." Little Ting noticed that there were strangers around, so he didn't say anything. He just rubbed his eyes and climbed to Lin Xiao's chest, hugging her neck. Lin Xiao followed his movements and changed his position. Then she looked back at him. She asked, "Have you slept enough?" Ting hugged her neck and lay down again. He narrowed his eyes and did not respond to Lin Xiao's words. "What about the mutant bird down there?" Qiu Lily asked Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao passed shouting to Qiu Lily. Ting, let Sister Lily hold it for a while. I'll go down and collect the bird before coming back up. Chiu Lily subconsciously stretched out her hands to catch Tingting's soft body. Then, she watched as Lin Xiao jumped down from the wall and landed beside the bird. Then, the bird disappeared the moment she touched it. Okay, the gate is open. Duan turned around and shouted at the gate below the wall. The captain guarding the door immediately responded and sent someone to open the door. After Lin Xiao came up, he carried Tingting and said, "Let's go back." Did it come just to deliver a bird? Chiu Lily asked curiously as she followed Lin Xiao. Maybe, Lin Xiao answered casually. However, she was puzzled. Why did the strange cat send a bird? Was this considered a gift? What? Besides, it didn't eat meat. Why would it send meat to them? The strange story of the strange cat sending a mutant bird to the gate of the base quickly spread in the base. Everyone felt that this was a novel thing, but at the same time, they were curious about why the strange cat did this. Have you heard? A six-legged, blood-red hairless strange cat sent a big bird to our base. It would be great if the bird wasn't a mutant. But this kind of behavior is like a kitten that would occasionally catch a bird or mouse from outside. But what's the purpose of this strange cat? Who knows? But I heard that it didn't intend to attack the base. It's the first time we've met such a friendly mutant beast. I just heard that it's too ugly and not good looking. How do you know it's ugly? I know the soldier guarding the gate. He said that the cat is very big, has no fur, and is blood red. It's ugly just thinking about it, and it has 2 horns on its head. Its teeth are also very long. After Lin Xiao returned home, Tingting said to her, "Mommy, that cat seems to like you." Lin Xiao looked at him strangely. How do you know? Can you sense its thoughts? After she sat on the sofa, Tingting climbed to the side and sat against the back of the sofa. He said, "No, I can't sense its thoughts, but I can feel from its breath that it is trying to please you." Lin Xiao smiled and said, "Do you know why it is doing this?" She could also feel that the strange cat was trying to please its owner, but she didn't understand why. Lin Xiao thought for a moment. She didn't do anything for the strange cat. Why did it come to her? Tingting rolled his eyes at her. How do I know? I'm hungry. Mommy, go and cook for me. Lin Xiao looked at him speechlessly and could only say, "Okay, I got it. Wrap yourself in the quilt. It's cold." Tingting said carelessly, "Don't be afraid of the cold. I won't catch a cold." On the other side, after the strange cat left the base, it didn't go far. Instead, it hid a few hundred meters away and quietly looked in the direction of the base. When it saw Lin Xiao coming down from the top of the wall and taking away the giant bird, it turned its head to look in the other direction, which was the direction of the Wu Shan plantation base and the military area. However, it only took a glance there before it really turned around and left. In the end, it looked in a direction not far away. A snake, a dog, a mushroom, and a tiger cub were quietly looking at it. Although they were very quiet, they were a little vigilant. Especially when the strange cat looked at them before it left, it made their necks stand up. They didn't relax until it was completely gone. Ow ow ow. Seeing that the big cat was gone, the tiger cub ran behind Wang's but then bit its tail and dragged it back. Woof! Wang immediately turned its head and barked at it, but in the next second, it dragged its tail and spun around in circles. Of course, the tiger cub was dragged by its tail and swung around again and again. In the end, the little tiger let go with a whimper and rolled out of the room twice. Woof woof woof. Wang pounced in front of it, lowered its front limbs, then raised its butt and barked a few times at the tiger cub. The tiger cub wasn't afraid of it. It immediately got up and opened its paws, looking like it was going to fight. It raised its head and barked at Wang. After the black snake saw that the big cat that was much more intimidating than them left, the two on its side immediately started playing. It coldly rolled its eyes at them, then turned around and slipped away. Chapter 12:25. When Lin Xiao fed Tingting, she discussed with him, "Son, let's discuss something." Tingting looked up at her. "What's the matter?" Lin Xiao fed him a mouthful of milk porridge and said, When you're full, why don't you come into my space to accompany your Uncle Lu? Tingting looked at her strangely. Why did you specifically ask me to go in to accompany him? Lin Xiao said, because he's in a bad mood right now. I think he likes you very much. Letting you in to accompany him will make him feel better. Tingting's expression became even more confused, and he asked her, why is he in a bad mood? Did he fall out of love? Lin Xiao rolled her eyes at him and said, he doesn't have a girl he likes now. How could he fall out of love? Then what's wrong? Tingting looked at her in confusion, and then opened his mouth to take the spoon that she stretched out. Because he already knows my true identity. He has always been very concerned about Lu Tianyu, so now that he is sure that I am not Lu Tianyu, he feels a little sad. Lin Xiao couldn't help but sigh when she thought of Lu Tianyu's expression and the aura of an abandoned puppy when he left. Did you tell him? But it's also true. He has been by your side for so long, he should be suspicious. After all, the original owner of your body is, after all, two people. It's not the same. Tingting was stunned and then said, Lin Xiao said, these days, he looks like he has lost his soul and has no spirit at all. That's why she wanted Tingting to go in to accompany him. Because in the past 2 days, Lu Tianyi had been sitting quietly on the steps in front of the small building in the space, and he didn't care about the vegetables and crops in the field. He let the other zombies do it themselves, and he didn't pay attention to them. Only when the zombies came to ask him would he come back to his senses a little. Lin Xiao knew what he was thinking. As long as she paid a little attention to his movements, she would be able to sense his thoughts. Right now, Lu Tianyi's heart was empty. After all, the family that he had always cared about was suddenly gone. Before, he had been lying to himself that he was thinking too much. When Lin Xiao really opened her mouth, he came back to his senses and realized that it was true. Just like everyone who had lost their loved ones, they would feel sad and their hearts would suddenly feel empty. Lin Xiao felt that if he used this body to comfort him, the effect would probably be the same. Therefore, when his friends and brothers were not here, he could only let little Tingting try. After feeding Tingting, Lin Xiao gave him a bath with hot water, changed his clothes, and carried him into the space. Lu Tianyi was sitting on the steps, looking ahead in a daze. Suddenly, a person flashed in front of him. But the first thing he saw was the little person in her arms. Uncle! As soon as Tingting saw Lu Tianyi, he turned around and reached out to hug him. Lu Tianyi hadn't seen Xiao Tingting since the day of the full moon banquet. Now that he suddenly saw him, his expression obviously turned cold. His eyes also flashed with some vigor. He stood up and took little Tingting into his arms. She smiled and asked, "Have you missed your uncle these days?" Tingting lay in his arms, nodded seriously and said, "Yes." Lu Tianyi's heart warmed slightly, then he looked up at Lin Xiao, but soon his eyes turned away with a complicated look. I don't have time to take care of him recently, and he doesn't like Duan Wan to hug him. So help me take care of him first. Lin Xiao thought of an excuse and said to Lu Tianyi. Lu Tianyi was startled when he heard this, then he seemed to understand something. He nodded and said, "I understand." Lin Xiao turned around and went out to prepare some daily necessities and clothes for Tingting. She brought them in and placed them in the living room. There was also some rice, mutated eggs, and a clay pot for Tingting to cook. They were all prepared and placed in the kitchen. Now in Lin Xiao's space, not only were there deer and sheep, but there were also a lot of chickens, ducks, geese, and even pigs. She had asked Lin Feng to bring people out to capture them alive for her to raise first. However, Lin Xiao didn't raise these birds with the deer and sheep on the big lawn opposite. Instead, she raised them in the open space behind the small building. She had already asked a metal-type ability user to make a few large iron cages and put these mutated but low-level chickens and ducks in the iron cages that were a few 100 meters square. Usually, Lu Tianyi fed them fodder made from rice and dried sweet potatoes. Although these mutated chickens and ducks also eat meat, they didn't reject vegetarians. In any case, they were omnivores. Speaking of which, after the mutation, the chickens could fly. Although the ducks still couldn't fly, it was difficult for them to dig holes in the ground. After the combat geese mutated, their combat strength became even more fierce. They fought in the cages every day, and goose feathers flew all over the place. Especially a few days ago when Lu Tianyi wasn't around, no one fed these chickens, ducks, and geese. The back of the building was noisy. Sometimes, when Lin Xiao couldn't stand it anymore, she would come in and scatter a few handfuls of fodder for them. She felt that Lu Tianyi was now the farm owner in her space. Without him around, she really couldn't do anything. No one cared about the vegetables in the fields, the rice and wheat in the fields, and the chickens, ducks, and geese. She threw the pigs on the lawn opposite the lake, letting them accompany the mutant deer and mutant sheep. Because these mutant pigs also ate the grass here, they wouldn't starve to death. But from time to time, they would fight with the deer and sheep. Fortunately, Lin Xiao had already raised these chickens, ducks, and geese, so there were eggs for Ting Ting to eat. However, these eggs couldn't be eaten by humans, so she could only give them to Ting Ting. So when Wu Qingyue made food for him, he used a special pot to cook it. Although he felt that he had eaten the female zombie clean, he didn't need to worry about it. But Ling Ling was still a normal person, so he couldn't neglect it. After Lin Xiao prepared everything, she thought for a moment and said, "If there's anything else you need, let me know." Lu Tianyi nodded. Ting Ting's appearance finally made him a little more spirited. He was just a little unwilling to look at Lin Xiao, his eyes always unintentionally avoiding her face. Seeing him nod, Lin Xiao turned and left the space. Ting Ting looked at Lu Tianyi, then asked him, "Uncle, are you still sad?" Lu Tianyi hugged him and sat on the sofa, looked at him, and asked with a smile, "How do you know I'm still sad?" Ting Ting looked at him with a pair of big eyes and said, "Uncle, you know what happened to Mama, so you're sad. And this is the second time you've been sad because of your sister. Because when Lu Tianyi died last year, Lu Tianyi definitely didn't feel good when he heard the news. Later, when he saw Lin Xiao who had become a zombie, he thought that Lu Tianyi had come back to life. In the end, he didn't expect that his understanding would be shattered again. His notorious sister had died a long time ago. More importantly, when she died, she still didn't treat him as family. Chapter 12:26. Lu Tianyi was stunned when he heard Ting Ting's words. Then he looked at him and asked, "Ting Ting, have you known about this for a long time?" Ting Ting nodded obediently. He had known about it before he was born. Lu Tianyi was a little disappointed, and then he sighed, "Yes, even you know about it. Have you always called me uncle? It turns out that you have another uncle." Ting Ting reached out to touch his chin and said, "What's the matter? We'll just treat you as an uncle. Although Mama occupied your sister's body, she also accepted a lot of things from your sister. For example, the mess and bad reputation she left behind, such as you, my younger brother. Anyway, it's not a big deal for my Mama to have one more brother." Then he withdrew his hand and sat in Lu Tianyi's arms, holding his small chest with his hands, and said with a mature expression, "Besides, Mama is not bad to you, and she doesn't treat you as an outsider. Isn't that right?" Hearing his words, Lu Tianyi looked down at him and was amused by his expression. "Yes, yes, yes, Ting Ting is right." Ting Ting loosened his hands and said, "Anyway, it's like this. What else can we do? Besides, although Mama's soul is not your sister's, her body is still hers. Besides, there's still me. I'm your real nephew after all, right? Maybe Mama can give me another younger brother or sister in the future. Won't you have another family member?" Lu Tianyi looked at him speechlessly and said with a smile, "You think too much. You even want your mother to give you a younger brother or sister. Are they as lucky as you? Besides, don't you still have Ling Ling?" Ting Ting spread his hands and said, "Of course I'm joking. I'm just trying to make you happy." Lu Tianyi said to him angrily, "You're so mischievous." However, talking to this child did make him feel better. He was not as depressed and uncomfortable as before. He understood what Ting Ting said. Anyway, things had become like this, and he could not change anything. He understood the reason, but he still felt uncomfortable. There was nothing he could do about it. After all, that was the only family he recognized. Even if that person's personality wasn't good and his way of doing things was terrible. But no matter what, she was still his sister. Even if he had been aware of it, it would still have affected him. In the past 2 days, he had thought a lot. What he had originally suspected had now become true. His sister was only a shell now. She was still his sister, but her heart was no longer hers. Was that still his sister? However, the original Lu Tianyu did not treat him as a younger brother. He didn't know if he should acknowledge the current Lin Xiao, but little Tingting was right. Lin Xiao had always been very good to him. He even sent people to find him when he was about to turn into a zombie, but they were still a step too late. Fortunately, it was also because of her that he could maintain his human appearance. Now that he had become a zombie, he definitely couldn't go back to Haicheng, let alone the other bases. However, he could not ignore Lin Xiao's existence. For the past few days, he had been thinking about how he should treat this female zombie who had taken over his sister's body, but he couldn't come up with a conclusion. He looked at Tingting and asked helplessly, "Did your mother ask you to comfort me?" Little Tingting nodded straightforwardly. "Yes, she has been paying attention to you these days. Seeing that you have been thinking about it, she asked me to enlighten you." Lu Tianyi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stretched out his hand and pointed at his forehead. "You can enlighten me? How old are you? You want to enlighten me?" Then he used his palm to rub the top of his head. "Pa." Little Tingting slapped his hand away. Why did these people like to rub his head now? Would it make him bald? If I don't enlighten you, should I let my mama do it? You definitely don't want to see her now, right? Right? Little Tingting crossed his two short hands in front of his chest, then lay in his arms and looked up at him. His small eyes had an expression that said, "I know what you are thinking." Lu Tianyi saw that his expression was very cute, and he smiled softly in his heart. "I will only think more and more when I see her now. My mind is too chaotic. And her situation is very special. I don't know what to do." Little Tingting nodded. "If you don't know what to do, then don't think about it. Let nature take its course. If you can let go of my mama's current body, you can also pretend that she doesn't exist. If you can't let go, then can't you just treat my mama as another sister? Just like how my mama treats you as another younger brother. Sometimes, relatives don't necessarily need to be related by blood. Only those who treat you sincerely are relatives." The last sentence made Lu Tianyi slightly stunned. Then he looked at Little Tingting's serious expression. He suddenly felt that the things he had been struggling with before now didn't matter anymore. That's right, sometimes relatives don't necessarily need to be related by blood. And those who are related by blood are not necessarily true relatives. The human heart is the most important. Those who treat you sincerely are better than those who don't care about you. What's more, it's already the end of the world. It's not like the peaceful society of the past. Now, there will only be fewer and fewer people who can treat you sincerely. Thinking about Lu Tianyu's attitude towards him in the past, it was indeed very cold. That was a coldness that really didn't care about him at all. All right, even if that heartless sister of yours is no longer here. You're still with us and I, the smart and cute little Ting. Little Ting patted the back of Lu Tiany's hand and said. Lu Tianyi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and his mood relaxed a lot. Then he sighed and patted little Ting's fluffy head, saying, "All right. For your sake, I'll let nature take its course. Anyway, life here isn't bad." After saying that, he carried little Ting out of the living room and stood on the steps to look at the fields outside. Although this space didn't belong to him, many of the things here were created by him. These vegetable fields, those rice fields, and the chickens, ducks, and geese behind the building. After all, he had spent a lot of effort here. If he left and someone else came, would they cripple him? At this time, little Ting suddenly said, "Or you should help me find an ant to divert my energy, so that I don't have to think about it all day. Look at Uncle Kong's progress with Auntie Long. Soon, he will evolve from a dog to a human. You should hurry up and evolve too, and how about it? I think that's a good idea." Right? Saying that, he looked at Lu Tianyi with a smile. Lu Tianyi didn't expect that he would stab himself in the back. He looked at him speechlessly. "I've already become a zombie, why would I still find a wife?" You can totally find a zombie wife. The aunties and sisters in Mama's army are all pretty good. Little Ting didn't care about his question at all, and said, And look, Uncle Xie is ready to be Tong Tong's father. Lu Tianyi. Chapter 12:27. Lin Xiao eavesdropped on the conversation between Lu Tianyi and Xiaotingting from outside the space and couldn't help but laugh. This kid was quite resourceful. He actually began to stab Lu Tianyi while chatting, although it was not painful or itchy. Although it didn't hurt, it could divert his attention. After she came out, she found a free time to peel the bird that the big cat had brought and soaked it in a large bucket. After a few hours, they would become food for the zombie army. Actually, the roe deer and goats in Lin Xiao's space for a year had all been purified. Not only were there no mutated viruses in their bodies, but there was also some energy from the lake in Lin Xiao's space. It should be known that the air in the good space was evaporated from the lake. The first batch of a dozen roe deer had become a large flock. The dozens of mutated goats also had a group of small milk lamb cakes following them. The insides of these little guys were clean and fit for human consumption. But they were goats and didn't have much fur. They couldn't collect a pile of wool like sheep, so they could only eat meat. When Lin Feng came back 2 days later, Lin Xiao handed over the affairs of the base to him. Then she took her people and set off towards Huaxia base. This time, she didn't look for Wu Qingyue. Instead, she took her people and set off. She wasn't in a hurry. From time to time, she would observe the underground creatures and hunt for energy nuclei. This time, the people she brought were half human and the other half zombies. Duan Wan and Xie Dong were still by her side. Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei didn't follow this time. Long Qingqing was also summoned by Lin Xiao and temporarily separated from Kong Qingming, who had just made some progress in their relationship. But Kong Qingming would probably follow Wu Qingyue this time, so they would meet again soon. Yuan Tianxing was in a coma, so Li Zhang's team was temporarily taken over by Lin Xiao. In addition to Xie Dong, LV Feng, He Jiyun, Su Fangfang, Xiao Si, and Gizergua also came with Lin Xiao's group of level 6 zombies. The old man said that there was no need to defend Yunming's base anymore. He was bored there. Why not go out with Lin Xiao? Anyway, old Mingua, who had recovered his memory, could act as he pleased. Fortunately, before he had any plans, he would always ask Lin Xiao for permission to show his respect to her as a leader. However, Lin Xiao felt that if she wasn't a zombie emperor, this old man wouldn't be so polite. Other than the 5 level 1 kings, there were also 10 level 5 leaders. They were all places that she hadn't seen before. The 3 pets naturally followed suit. Now there were 4. There was one more proud little tiger. Not long after they left the base, Mo Yen appeared with his beautiful follower. Mo Yen looked left and right at Lin Xiao's formation, then at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao knew what he meant and said straightforwardly, "Yes, a new batch. The previous batch wasn't even my personal team. I was just looking for an opportunity to train them. You want to go to Huaxia this time because you want that person to take action? It's not time yet, is it? Your current strength is still very low." Right now, Mo Yen had only just recovered to his level 6 king level 1 state, and he had only just recovered. The energy had not even stabilized yet. However, Mo Yen pointed at his own throat. Lin Xiao glanced at him. "Oh, I thought you wanted to be a mute." Mo Yen rolled his eyes at her. Lin Xiao nodded. "All right, since you want to recover your ability to speak, I will satisfy you. But you have to take a shower first." Lin Xiao was also very helpless about the fact that the lake could completely wash away all the clothes they were wearing. Every time she did something, she had to ask everyone to take off their clothes. Everyone looked at her like they were looking at a hooligan. Luckily, Mo Yen had stayed in her space for a long time, so he was already used to her taking off her clothes before entering the lake. So he didn't feel like there was anything wrong. However, a white shadow suddenly flashed in front of him, blocking his way. The female zombie stared at Lin Xiao with a vigilant face. She wasn't afraid even under the pressure of Lin Xiao's zombie emperor, but her expression made Lin Xiao speechless. "What? Is he your husband? Are you afraid that I will steal him? It's just taking a shower and taking off his clothes. Do you think I would be thirsty for him?" Hearing Lin Xiao's words, the people who were secretly watching couldn't help but cover their mouths and laugh. Then, Mo Yen looked at Lin Xiao with an expression that said, "Who knows? I'm so handsome," and looked at Lin Xiao in disbelief. Lin Xiao. Why the hell did she help this bastard? Forget it. You look like a woman. I don't like you. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes at him with disdain. Mo Yan's facial features were indeed very delicate, but his chin was a bit sharp. He had the kind of face that couldn't differentiate between a man and a woman. Plus, he had an evil temperament, a very strong aura, and a very tall height. So no one would think that he was effeminate. If you just stared at his current face, you would find that the more you looked at him, the more handsome he was, and the more beautiful he was. Especially now that his face didn't have the wrinkles from before, he suddenly looked a lot more delicate. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, Mo Yan's face darkened. The female zombie in white also glared at Lin Xiao angrily. Lin Xiao tilted her head and looked at Mo Yan, who was behind her, and asked, "Are you going to control your subordinates? Do you want me to help you? Hurry up, don't waste time." Hearing her say that, Mo Yan had to pretend that he didn't hear what Lin Xiao said. He raised his hand and patted the female zombie's shoulder. The female zombie then moved to the side unwillingly. "Even if you are guarding against me, he will still come to me himself. Tell me, what's the point of being wary of me?" Lin Xiao was speechless as he threw a sentence at the beautiful zombie and brought Mo Yan into the space. Originally, she only wanted to bring Mo Yan in, since it wasn't a big deal and wouldn't take too long. She didn't think that the female zombie would grab Mo Yan's hand and follow them in. Lin Xiao. So stubborn. After entering the space, Mo Yan went back to his room and took a shower. These days, he didn't have a good shower outside, so he didn't reject Lin Xiao's request. After taking a shower, he just walked down wearing a pair of bullet underwear, which caught Lu Tianyi and Teng Teng, who were sitting on the stairs, off guard. Lu Tianyi subconsciously covered Teng Teng's eyes and couldn't help but say to Mo Yan, who was walking over, "I say, can you at least wear a pair of underwear?" However, Mo Yan just turned around and smiled at him, then continued to walk towards Lin Xiao. Chapter 12:28. Lu Tianyi silently covered Xiao Tengteng's eyes and whispered, "Little devil, don't look around." Hearing Xiao Tengteng's words, Lin Xiao brazenly sized up Mo Yan's body. Then she said, "It's okay. Let's go, let's go." As she spoke, she waved a black mist to cover herself, then took off her clothes and went into the water. She sighed in her heart, when would she be able to directly control the energy in the lake to the surface, instead of going down to the bottom of the lake every time? She could control the energy in the air in the space, but she just couldn't draw out the energy in the lake. Even if she advanced to the level of a zombie emperor, she still couldn't do this. Mo Yan didn't care about the gazes of others staring at his naked body, and calmly walked towards the lake. Because Lin Xiao went down first to control the energy in the lake, Mo Yan didn't feel any sense of danger. Only the female zombie in the dress quietly stood by the lake and stared at it. Everyone outside the space was free to do whatever they wanted, waiting for Lin Xiao to come out. A few of Lin Xiao's pets were also running around in the nearby forest, chasing the surrounding mutated beasts. Woof, a werewolf, Wang, whose whole body was pitch black, was chasing a level 4 mutated cat. Meow. The mutated cat let out an ear-piercing cry and ran with all its might. Obviously, Wang didn't want to kill it so quickly and wanted to play with it first. But others didn't want to let it continue playing. When the mutated cat was running forward, suddenly a big black snake head rushed out with its mouth wide open and bit the mutated cat that weighed more than 100 kilograms. Meow-o-woo. The mutated cat let out another pitiful cry, and then there was no sound. Woof! Wang saw Dehei suddenly rush out to kill its prey, and was stunned for a moment. In the end, before it could react, Dehei spat the mutated cat in its mouth in front of it, and then slipped away. Wang. The mushroom spirit passed by with the little tiger on its head, and saw that Wang wasn't interested in the already dead mutated cat, so it slowly came over. It stretched out a few tentacles towards the mutated cat that was poisoned to death by Dehei. The little tiger seemed to know that the mushroom spirit was doing something bad, and quietly laid down, looking at the mushroom spirit's tentacles for a moment, and then looking at Wang's expression. It wondered if Guzi would let the mushroom spirit take the dead cat. Seeing that the mushroom spirit was getting closer, Wang finally turned his head impatiently and barked at it, "Woof! If you want to take it, hurry up and take it. What are you dilly-dallying for?" Hearing its cry, the mushroom spirit immediately jumped to the side of the dead cat. Its tentacles quickly wrapped around the dead cat's body, then it turned around and ran away. Wang was speechless. Wang looked at the mushroom spirit running away and flicked its tail. Wang didn't Guzi. Wang wanted to take the mushroom spirit, Wang's hua and hua. Then its head. And it. Hua, fu, and it. It I, Wang isn, I haze I, and Wang I, and I, Wang si, and Zhao's, and I, and Wang and Wang and. So, it threw the dead cat on the ground, but it didn't eat it. The little tiger jumped down from its head and sniffed the cat's body. He smelled the smell of snake venom in it, so he turned his head in disgust and walked to the side to sit down. In fact, it wanted to eat the meat that its master had soaked in the lake water. It didn't want to eat the body that hadn't even been peeled off. Seeing that the little tiger wasn't interested, the mushroom spirit poked the cat's body with its tentacles. It turned the cat's body over and over again, and then pushed it towards the little tiger. Ow! The little tiger didn't appreciate it. It just sat there and licked its paws. Seeing that the little tiger didn't want it, the mushroom spirit hesitated for a while. Then, it dragged the dead cat back and stuck its tentacles into the corpse, which hadn't hardened yet, and began to suck the flesh and blood. Soon, the plump cat's body shriveled, and even the luster of its fur disappeared. It became like dry grass. The whole cat's body became a mummy. After eating for a while, the mushroom spirit retracted its tentacles and began to swing them left and right. It didn't care whether it was poisonous or not, since it could digest it anyway. The little tiger thought for a while. It hadn't eaten its master's meat recently. It kept eating meat that hadn't been soaked in water, and it wasn't tasty at all. Why didn't its master feed it? Was it because its master didn't catch any prey? Then it would catch it. After seeing that the mushroom spirit was full, it stood up, looked left and right, and then climbed up a tree at the side. Very good, ordinary tigers didn't know how to climb trees. But mutated tigers were different. Their claws and bodies were more agile. It stood on the tree and sniffed around. After a while, it jumped down. Then he quietly dashed in a direction. Although the mushroom spirit didn't know what it wanted to do, it still followed it silently. So, not long after, Xie Dong and the others saw the little tiger and the mushroom spirit come back with a live rat in their mouths, and a few struggling mutated beasts under the mushroom umbrella. What are they doing? Duan Wan looked curiously at the two of them dragging a bunch of prey back. Usually, they would come back after eating their fill. Why did they catch them alive today? I don't know. Are they going to give them to us? Xie Dong thought for a while and said. Duan Wan looked at him speechlessly. If they're going to give it to us, of course it's for the leader. For us? I think you're thinking too much. Xie Dong shrugged indifferently. Then it's for the leader. When Lin Xiao came out with the Mo Yen, who had recovered his voice, she suddenly realized that everyone was looking at her. HM? What's wrong? Lin Xiao looked at them in confusion. Everyone pointed to the other side at the same time. Lin Xiao turned around. She saw 4 big pets sitting in a row, and in front of them was a pile of half-dead prey. Lin Xiao? What's going on? What are they doing? Everyone shrugged and shook their heads. Lin Xiao. She turned around and looked at the 4 pets in confusion. What was the meaning of this? Woof! At this moment, 2 dogs wagged their tails and barked at her. Lin Xiao walked over to them, confused. She stood in front of the dozen or so big and small prey and looked at them. They really caught a lot of them and they were all alive. Forget about the level 4 and 5 ones. What was with this big rat in front of the little tiger that wasn't even level 2? Chapter 12:29. Lin Xiao looked at the row of half-dead prey and found that the ones in front of Dahe had not been bitten by it. Those that had been strangled by it were all twisted, but they were still alive. The ones in front of Er Wang were either bitten off their legs, or bitten off their legs, or bitten off their legs. Ow, 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 At this time, the little tiger suddenly roared at Lin Xiao, and then patted the big rat in front of it with its paw. It deliberately found a second-level rat with a clean smell to catch, because it couldn't catch a big one. It was still very weak now, so it could only catch a second-level rat. Lin Xiao walked up to it and looked down at it. "What do you want to do?" "Ow!" The little tiger threw the big, breathless rat at her feet. Lin Xiao looked at its actions and asked blankly, "Is it for me?" The little tiger raised its round face and continued to roar at her. Lin Xiao said helplessly, "I don't know how to listen to you. How would I know what you mean? But since you gave it to me, I'll take it." After saying that, she put the big rat away. Ow! As soon as she put it away, the little tiger immediately jumped up and roared at her. Then it ran around her feet and patted Lin Xiao's calf with its paw. Lin Xiao was speechless. What did it mean? Although she had saved this guy before, she didn't have much time to communicate with it. She didn't understand what it meant at all. Did it not want her to put it away? Thinking of this, Lin Xiao released the big rat again. As expected, it immediately quieted down. It sat next to the fluffy rat, patted it with its paw, and finally piled up on Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao was confused. She turned to the others and asked, "What does it mean? Does it want to give it to me or not?" Duanwan said with a smile, "I don't know. We're not keepers. How would we know what it means? They didn't let us get close." Previously, when a person passed by, they all bared their teeth and growled at him. Lin Xiao looked at Xie Dong, who said helplessly, "If it's not for you, does it want you to feed it?" "Feed it? But wasn't it used to being wild recently? Why are you suddenly calling for me?" Lin Xiao was even more confused. At that moment, Mo Yen rubbed his chin and moved closer. His approach immediately alerted the little tiger and the other three. However, because Mo Yan's zombie emperor aura was too strong, they didn't dare to roar at him. However, he took a defensive stance. Even acquaintances were not allowed to get close. Mo Yen looked at them and said, "Are you going to raise them in a zoo? Or do you want to open a ranch? There are tigers, snakes, sheep, and roe deer." His voice had the unique hoarseness of zombies, but it had a unique sense of carefreeness. It was very magnetic. It wasn't unpleasant to hear, but it wasn't very pleasant either. It was a very special sound that gave people a special subtle feeling when they heard it. Lin Xiao was teased by him. She rolled her eyes at him and said, "It's not bad to open a zoo. What, do you have a problem with that?" Mo Yen immediately shook his head and smiled, "I wouldn't dare. But your little tiger's behavior is quite interesting. What does it want to do?" Lin Xiao said, "I also want to know. Why don't you help me guess?" Mo Yen said, "Why do I need to guess what a tiger is thinking? I'm not familiar with it. Why don't you let your little brother come out and take a look? He should be familiar with the little tiger, right?" Lin Xiao heard this and her eyes lit up. "That's right. Let Lu Tianyi come out and see what this little guy wants to do." After saying that, she immediately flashed in, and after a while, she came out with Lu Tianyi and her son. Lin Xiao hugged Ting Teng and asked the two of them, "What do you think this little guy is doing? He pushed the mouse in front of me, but he won't let me put it in the dimensional space." "Then why did he push it to me?" Lu Tianyi saw the little tiger and happily walked over to pick it up. "Wow, Hua Hua, you've grown up. You're so heavy." "Ow, ow, ow." The little tiger struggled a bit unwillingly as it was picked up. It then used its two paws to prop itself up on one of Lu Tianyi's shoulders. Lin Xiao looked at Lu Tianyi speechlessly. "When did you name it Hua Hua?" Lu Tianyi smiled. "I called it a long time ago." Lin Xiao looked at him as if he was an idiot. "I don't want to ask, but why did you name a male tiger Hua Hua?" "Ow, ow." As soon as she finished speaking, Hua Hua immediately began to struggle restlessly. It was also very strong. Lu Tianyi couldn't hold it for a while and let it jump down. However, Hua Hua didn't care how feminine its name was. It only cared about the problem of food. Thus, it ran to the big mouse and patted it. This time, it didn't bark at Lin Xiao, but at Lu Tianyi. It's hungry. It's hungry. At this moment, Lu Tianyi and Ting Ting spoke at the same time. Lin Xiao looked at Lu Tianyi in confusion, then at Ting Ting. Ting Ting looked at the little tiger and said to Lu Tianyi, "Is it, uncle?" Lu Tianyi squatted down beside the little tiger and stroked its furry round head. He looked up at Ting Ting and asked, "Ting Ting, how did you know?" Ting Ting touched his chin with his little hand and said, "I can feel it." Lin Xiao asked curiously, "If it's hungry, then why did you give it to me?" Lu Tianyi stood up and said to her, "It actually wants to eat the meat you soaked in the lake water. It's probably because the novelty of coming out to play a while ago has passed. Now, it's starting to complain that the raw meat isn't as delicious as the raw meat you soaked in." The meat soaked in Lin Xiao's water was very delicious. Whether it was the zombies or the mutated beasts, they all liked it very much. And when they were in the space, they would occasionally go and eat the meat that Lin Xiao sometimes soaked in the bucket. Lin Xiao didn't notice this, but Lu Tianyi did. When Lin Xiao heard this, she turned to look at the beasts and asked in surprise, "It can't be, is that what he said?" Woof, Wang barked at her happily, because it could understand Lu Tianyi's words. Dahe could also understand a little, but it had always been a quiet, handsome man. Bah! Oh, it's a beautiful male snake. Lin Xiao saw Wang's reaction and said, "Seems like it's true. Since it's like this, I'll leave it to you. I'll put them into the space. You take care of the rest, I have to hurry." As she said this, she glanced at Lu Tianyi, because other than herself and Lu Tianyi, no one else was allowed to get close to these prey. "Go in and don't run around, I'm telling you." In the end, Lin Xiao warned them and put them all into the space. Lu Tianyi went to serve them. Chapter 12:30. Just as Lin Xiao put away the snake, dog, tiger, and a bunch of prey, she got into the car with Ting Ting and was about to leave. Suddenly, a red shadow flashed above their convoy. Then there was a loud bang and a huge object fell. When everyone saw the huge object and the red shadow in the sky, they all complained in their hearts, "Oh, another one." Lin Xiao stuck her head out of the car window and looked at the huge strange cat that suddenly appeared. Then he looked at the huge, upon closer inspection, it was a mutated black bull. Before Lin Xiao could react, the strange red cat in midair turned around and disappeared with a flick of its tail. Lin Xiao was speechless. She looked at where the huge cow was lying. If she didn't put it away, she wouldn't be able to pass. Yes, this one is really here to deliver something. Ting Ting climbed onto her lap and stuck his head out of the window. Then he retracted his head and stood in the middle of the back seat, looking at the huge cow through the front windshield. The one just now was for him to eat. This one was for his mama. Duan Wan, who was about to drive, put her hand on the steering wheel and looked back at Lin Xiao. This was the second time. What was this strange cat doing? It came and went without a trace. The people in the cars behind all stuck their heads out to look at the black cow blocking the road. "It's so big. How many tons do you think this cow is?" 3 tons? It's twice as big as that hairless cat. It's definitely more than 3 tons. This cow is bigger than an adult elephant. Lin Xiao got out of the car with Ting Ting in her arms. She was about to walk toward the cow that she didn't know was dead or alive, but she stopped after taking 2 steps. She turned her head and looked around. Then she looked helpless. Is there no end to it? What is this one doing here? Lin Xiao looked around and asked speechlessly. Ting Ting also looked around with his arms around her neck, but his senses were much clearer than Lin Xiao's. "Have you seen this one before? It doesn't seem to want to come close." Hearing that, Lin Xiao couldn't help but look down at him in surprise. "How do you know it won't come close?" Ting Ting was silent for 2 seconds and said, "Intuition." Lin Xiao. She looked around again and found that the one hiding in the dark did not seem to want to come out. He had no choice but to turn around and walk towards the big black buffalo. Then he put the shiny and glossy mutant buffalo into the space. Although he wasn't dead yet, he was close to it. In the open space of the small building in the space, Lu Tianyi was busy dealing with the prey brought back by Dahe and Wang. The 4 of them were gathered on the front desk, the balcony, or the rooftop. 3 pairs of eyes and 1 eyeless mushroom head were staring at him. In the end, at this time, there was another sound of a creature landing on the other side of the open space. Lu Tianyi, the 4 pets, and the zombies in the vegetable field all turned their heads at the same time. Oh really? You want me to handle this one too? This is too big. It's much bigger than the ones you caught. Lu Tianyi's face darkened when he saw the bowl, but he soon turned his head to ridicule Dahe and the others. Woof! Erwang barked at him discontentedly from the balcony. It could still see Lu Tianyi's disgusted expression. Dahe, whose head was lying on the rooftop, hung its head down, then slid to the ground and crawled towards the big black buffalo. Then, it circled the big black buffalo twice and looked at it a few times. Then, it slipped back and climbed to the rooftop again. Lu Tianyi looked at the big rat in his hand that had just been skinned, then looked at the other prey piled up like a mountain, and then looked at the big buffalo that was just thrown in. He suddenly felt very tired. He was just in a good mood and suddenly increased his workload. How could he be good? What made him even more speechless was that these few in front of him were not willing to let others touch their prey. He couldn't even find a helper if he wanted to. But now that the buffalo wasn't caught by them, they shouldn't mind, right? After thinking for a while, Lu Tianyi called out to Pesticide, who was catching insects in the vegetable field, "Pesticide, come over here." Pesticide looked up at him but didn't immediately go over. Lu Tianyi continued to wave at him, "Come over? Do you want me to invite you over?" Hearing him say this, Pesticide slowly stood up and walked over. Lu Tianyi handed him a knife and pointed at the cow, "Go over, kill the cow." Pesticide's expression instantly became confused. He didn't know how to. Moreover, that bull was so big. Would it suddenly move and kick him away? Lu Tianyi said to him in a bad mood, "It's about to die, why don't you just go over and stab it in the neck? How weak are you to be able to be kicked by it?" Pesticide hesitantly accepted a short military knife. His heart trembled with fear as he approached the giant bull. Lin Xiao put the cow into the space and threw it to Lu Tianyi, then turned around and returned to the car. Everyone then drove away and once again headed towards China. Mo Yen sat on the roof of the last car. Beside him was the female zombie in the white dress. He looked at the black shadow that flashed by from time to time in the forest behind them and asked the female zombie, "I don't know what that female zombie has that attracts these mutant beasts, but they all want to follow her. Is it because of the smell on her body?" The smell on Lin Xiao's body was indeed different from ordinary zombies. It had a faint, refreshing smell. He didn't know what effect the female zombie's smell had on the mutant beasts, but for zombies like them, it was just a little more fragrant. It was just a little more fragrant, but there was also a kind of refreshing sweetness in it. The female zombie just looked at him quietly and didn't say anything. Mo Yen knew that she also didn't understand why it was like this, but he still continued to talk to her. But these two have been following her for a long time. The cat knows to send its prey, but the dog doesn't. Is it because the dog is stupid? The female zombie. How would she know if the dog was stupid or the cat was smarter? She's not a cat or a dog. At this time, Mo Yen suddenly said, "In the future, if I encounter any danger, you should follow her. You should follow her. Perhaps it will be safer for you." Now the zombies in the outside world were not only facing humans, but also those mutant beasts from the underground. Roar Dash, the female zombie growled at him and shook her head firmly. "You were the one who told me not to leave you, and now you want to leave me." Mo Yen sighed, his handsome face was a little gloomy. He said, "Don't worry, I won't go find him now. When I recover to my strongest state, I will go." "But you can't go with me." The female zombie's eyes widened, and she looked down at the back of his head in confusion. "Roar?" Mo Yen looked back and smiled, looked at her eyes and said, "I don't want you to be with me and not be able to become a zombie." His smile didn't have the usual evil feeling, and it wasn't a crooked smile. It was gentle with a little bit of pity. Chapter 12:31. A kilometer behind Lin Xiao and the others, a black wind flashed by from time to time. A huge long-haired dog leaped lightly and chased after Lin Xiao and the others' car. Even further away, a huge red shadow flashed by from time to time on the mountain. Lin Xiao sat in the car with Teng Teng in her arms. She could sense the presence of two beasts following them from afar. But because of their strange attitude, they had no intention of attacking, so Lin Xiao decided to wait and see. Therefore, Lin Xiao decided to wait and see. She didn't know what these two were planning to do with her. I want to go in and see Uncle. Teng Teng crawled on the back seat for a while, looking at the desolate scenery outside with no interest. He's busy and has no time for you. Lin Xiao turned to look at him. In the space, Lu Tianyi and Zong Zong were busy dividing the meat. Teng Teng could only watch from the side. Although this child wouldn't disturb Lu Tianyi, it would distract him. Mommy, you're so cruel. You just told me to comfort him. You immediately gave him so much work. It feels like he's your personal farm owner. Aren't you afraid he'll be angry? Teng Teng thought of the pile of prey just now. There were 12 to 13 of them in total. There was also the huge cow at the end. It would probably take a long time to break up the meat. He thought about his poor uncle who was forced to do manual labor again. Why didn't I give him something to do to distract him so he won't think too much? Lin Xiao sighed and smiled. Then she turned to look outside. It might have been better if she told him in the beginning. But at that time, he might have been disgusted with her for taking over his sister's body. Luckily, he didn't hate her when he suspected the truth. This made Lin Xiao heave a sigh of relief. Teng Teng sat cross-legged on the chair and crossed his hands in front of his chest. He sighed and said, "Uncle is so pitiful. He only had one sister and she refused to acknowledge him. His sister refused to acknowledge him. It was fine if she didn't acknowledge him, but now she was dead. In the end, his sister became a fake sister." After that, he turned his head and glanced at Lin Xiao meaningfully. The fake sister, Lin Xiao, looked down at him helplessly. "I can't do anything about it. It's not like I want to take over Lu Tianyi's body. I don't know what's going on, but it actually ran into someone else's body. I'm also very helpless. Besides, I'm not treating Lu Tianyi as a fake younger brother. I'm treating him better than Lin Hao." Little Ting Ting thought about it and said, "That's true." His mother had always been good to Lu Tianyi, although she was now using the identity of Lu Tianyu. But his mother didn't snatch it. She picked it up. Moreover, Lu Tianyu was already dead. What could he do? While Lin Xiao continued to head towards Huaxia, Wu Qingwei left Haiqing with Xiao Liqing, Kong Qingming and the others. He even brought Wu Yueling with him. "Daddy, when can we meet Ting Ting and Mommy?" Wu Yueling sat on the chair at the back, holding a big furry ball in her arms. She turned her head to look at Wu Qingyue expectantly and asked in a low voice. Wu Qingyue smiled at her and reached out to touch her head. "They didn't go with us. Maybe we won't see them until tomorrow." Wu Yueling's small eyes, which had been shining with anticipation, immediately dimmed. She lowered her head in disappointment and moved her mouth. "Oh!" She stroked the fat gray rabbit in her arms from time to time. The fat gray rabbit had been raised for a year, so it grew very fast. It was already very big. Its body was covered in fur and soft fat. Hugging it in his arms was like a small heater, warm and cozy. Seeing her like this, Wu Qingwei pretended to be sad and said, "Why, Lingling, don't you want to be with Daddy? Daddy will be sad." Wu Yueling looked up and saw that he was still smiling. She rolled her eyes at him and lowered her head. Xiao Liqing, who was driving in front, asked Wu Yueling jokingly, "Lingling, didn't you just separate from Tingting and the others? Do you miss them so soon?" Wu Yueling looked at his side profile and said, "Yeah, I just don't want to be separated from them. It's a pity that your daddy hasn't gotten your new mother yet. But it won't be long. Lingling, you have to be patient." Xiao Liqing smiled. Thinking about how the two of them held hands and went to cultivate on the bed a few days ago, how could there be any progress? At this moment, the smell of wild beasts suddenly appeared in front of them, and it seemed to be a large group. Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing's expressions changed slightly, and they looked ahead with a slightly serious expression. "Qingming, go ahead and take a look." Without waiting for Wu Qingyue to say anything, Xiao Liqing slowed down the car, then picked up the short-distance communication device and spoke to his mouth. "Got it." Kong Qingming's voice came from the earbud on one of Xiao Liqing's ears. Then the car at the front began to speed up. The large group of beasts was still a distance away from them, so after driving for more than 10 minutes, Kong Qingming saw that the road in front of them was covered with a pile of unknown black things. But those beasts were not of the good kind. Kong Qingming got out of the car, jumped onto the roof, and looked in that direction. After looking carefully for a while, he saw that it was a pile of monsters with short limbs, crawling on the ground. Those things looked strange. Their heads were like flowers, and there was something in the middle that looked like a tongue that flickered. It looked so disgusting. Their bodies were flat and they had no tails. But it was unknown whether it was the sides of their waists or the sides of their stomachs, but there were rows of spikes growing horizontally. Their forelegs were only half a meter tall, but their claws were very long and sharp. Each of them was at least a meter long and a meter wide. Each of them had their flower-like heads raised up high, and the long tongues in the center of the flower were pointed in the direction of Kong Qingming and the others. Kong Qingming and the others stopped at a distance of at least 300 to 400 meters away from them, but they quickly sensed it. They all raised their heads and paused for a moment, then suddenly rushed in their direction. "Drive the car away first." Kong Qingming jumped out of the car, then waved his hands from both sides to the middle. The plants on both sides of the road grew crazily, extending towards the strange things that were crawling over and wrapping them up. Then, they were lifted up one by one and tightly strangled. Their bodies were sealed and all their bones were crushed. "Fuck, what the hell is this? It's disgusting just looking at it." Zheng Xiaoyan's face turned cold when he got out of the car and saw those things. Their bodies were fine, so be it if they were flat. But what was with that head? Why was it a flower? It was fine if it was just a flower, but there was a hole in the middle of the flower, and the edge of the hole was filled with teeth. There was also a long rope that was swinging out of the hole, dancing around. It made one feel uncomfortable just looking at it. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.